Close your eyes for a moment, or keep them soft, half open, however feels right. You're here now. Wherever you are, in your bed, on your pillow, wrapped in blankets, or just the dark. And I'm here too, right beside you. We're going to spend some time together tonight. No rush, nowhere else to be. If this helps you rest, if you find yourself drifting off peacefully, would you let me know? A like, a subscribe, it tells me you're out there, and I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from tonight? What city holds you? What time is it there? Tell me in the comments sometime. We're all scattered across the world, but right now, in this moment, we're together in the dark. Before we begin, let's settle in. Really settle. Dim the lights if you haven't already, or let them be off entirely. Let the darkness be a kind of blanket too. Adjust your pillow. Find the cool side, or the warm side, whichever your body wants. Let your head sink into it. Feel how it holds you. Now your shoulders. They're probably lifted, tense, carrying something. Let them drop. Just let them fall toward the mattress. You don't need to hold anything up right now. Your jaw. Is it clenched? It often is, without us knowing. Let it go slack. Let your teeth part slightly. Let your tongue rest soft in your mouth. Your hands. Are they fisted, gripping the blanket? Let them open. Let the fingers curl naturally, like a sleeping child's. Take a breath now, slow. Let the air fill you gently, expanding your ribs, your belly. Hold it for just a moment and release. Let it go like a sigh. Let everything go with it. One more breath, slower this time. In through the nose, feeling the cool air enter. Down into the lungs, filling every corner. And out through the mouth, warm and soft. Let your body grow heavier with each exhale. Good. Tonight, we're stepping into a world that existed 300 years ago. But not to learn, not to study, not to be tested on any of this tomorrow. Just to visit. To sit beside women in candlelit rooms. To walk with them in quiet gardens. To hear the rustle of silk and the scratch of pen on paper. We're going to spend time in the quiet hours, the afternoon hours, that strange, in-between space when the morning's demands had faded and the evening's obligations hadn't yet arrived. Hours that belonged, almost, to the women who lived them. What did they do? What did they think about? What did they dream? These are the questions we'll hold tonight. Gently. The way you might hold something fragile and beautiful. A bird's egg found on a forest path. A letter from someone you loved. No need to grip too tightly. Just let the images come. And when your eyes grow heavy, when the words start to blur into warmth, let them go. Let yourself go. I'll still be here. The story will continue, soft and low. A current you can drift on even as sleep takes you. There's no wrong way to do this. If you fall asleep in the first 5 minutes, that's perfect. If you stay awake for an hour, that's perfect too. This is not a performance. This is a gift you're giving yourself. The gift of rest, of beauty, of time that belongs to no one but you. Let's begin. Picture this. Paris. The year is 1763. April. Early afternoon. A window, tall and narrow, set into a wall of pale stone. Sunlight falls through the glass in a long golden rectangle, landing on a floor of polished wood. Dust motes drift in the light, lazy, unhurried, like thoughts that have nowhere particular to go. A woman sits beside this window. She is perhaps 35 years old, though she looks younger in this light. The lines around her eyes softened, the silver threads in her dark hair invisible. She wears a gown of pale blue silk the colour of a spring sky just after rain. The fabric rustles when she moves. A sound like whispered secrets. Her name, let us call her Marianne. She has been sitting here for perhaps 10 minutes, though time moves strangely in the quiet hours. It stretches and compresses. A minute can feel like an hour. An hour can vanish like breath on a mirror. The morning is over. The elaborate rituals of waking, of dressing, the stays laced tight by her maid's practiced fingers, the petticoats layered one upon another like pages in a book, the powder touched to her hair until it gleamed like frost. All of that is done now. The morning letters have been written, sealed with red wax bearing the imprint of her husband's family crest. The household accounts have been reviewed, the columns of figures adding up to a life she manages but does not quite control. The cook has been consulted about dinner. A soup, a fish course, a roast, a pudding, the eternal rotation of meals that mark the days like bells marking hours. And now it is 2 o'clock. The clock in the corner has just chimed, its small brass voice filling the room and fading, leaving behind a silence that feels almost alive. Marianne has perhaps 3 hours before anyone will need her again. 3 hours that are almost her own. Almost. That word matters. Because even now, even in this quiet room with the dust motes drifting and the light falling soft across her hands, she is not entirely free. Her husband might send for her. A visitor might arrive unannounced. One of the children might need something, though they are old enough now that their needs come less often, are less urgent. But still, the possibility hangs in the air. The knowledge that this time is borrowed, not owned. She looks out the window. The gardens below are still, green and orderly. Hedges clipped into geometric shapes that please the eye and impose order on nature. A gardener moves slowly between the hedges, his back bent, his movements unhurried. She watches him without really seeing him. What is she thinking about? We cannot know. Not really. The inside of another person's head is the most foreign country there is, and the inside of a head from 3 centuries ago is more foreign still. But we can imagine, we can sit beside her in that quiet room, in that quiet hour, and wonder, perhaps she is thinking about the novel she has been reading, hidden inside a book of sermons so her husband won't disapprove. Perhaps she is composing a letter in her head to her sister in Lyon, full of small gossip and unspoken longing. Perhaps she is remembering something from long ago, a summer afternoon in her childhood, the smell of her mother's perfume, a game she played with a cousin who has since died. Perhaps she is thinking about nothing at all, letting her mind empty and fill with the pure sensation of light and warmth and quiet. Perhaps she is happy, perhaps she is sad, perhaps she is something in between, something that has no name, the way most of our feelings have no names if we're honest about it. This is what we're doing tonight, sitting beside women like Marianne, women whose names have been forgotten, whose afternoons dissolved into evenings, into years, into centuries, women who lived and breathed and thought and felt, and left behind just enough traces for us to piece together the shapes of their days, not their great deeds, not their famous moments, just their quiet hours. Take another breath now. Slow. Feel yourself settling deeper into wherever you are. We're going to move gently through this world. Through parlours in Paris and drawing rooms in London, through modest homes in German villages and merchants' houses in English port towns. We'll meet women of privilege and women who served them, women who had hours to spare and women who had none. But for now, stay here. In this room, with Marianne, the light shifts. A cloud passes over the sun, and for a moment the room grows dimmer, cooler. Then the cloud moves on, and the warmth returns. The embroidery frame sits in Marianne's lap, untouched now for several minutes. Her hands rest on the wooden frame, still and patient. The clock ticks, the dust motes drift. Somewhere in the house, a door closes softly, and somewhere, in the quiet of her mind, Marie-Anne is living a life we'll never fully see. But we can visit. We can rest in the same stillness she knew. And that's what we're doing tonight. Soon, we'll explore what filled these afternoon hours. The books hidden inside other books. The letters written in careful script. The needlework that occupied hands while minds wandered elsewhere. But not yet. For now, just this. A woman by a window. Spring light. The sound of a clock ticking. The weight of silence. Let your eyes close if they're heavy. Let your body sink into softness. There is nowhere else you need to be. Before we can understand the afternoon, we need to understand the day, because afternoon meant something different then. It occupied a different place in the rhythm of life. It had different edges, different textures, different possibilities. To step into the quiet hours of the 18th century, we first need to know what came before them and what waited after. Morning, in those days, did not begin at 6 or 7. Not for women of means, anyway. Marie-Anne might wake at 9, perhaps 10. The sun would already be well up, streaming through the gaps in the heavy curtains drawn around her bed. But waking was not the simple thing it is for us. There was no throwing off the covers and stumbling to the kitchen, no quick splash of water on the face before checking a phone. There was a process, an elaborate, time-consuming process that could take hours. First, the bed itself. Imagine it, a massive wooden structure, 4 posts rising to a canopy draped with heavy fabric. Curtains hung on all 4 sides, drawn closed at night to keep out the cold, because the cold was real in those houses. Even grand houses. Even in April, the walls were stone or plaster, the windows single-paned and draughty, the heating entirely dependent on fireplaces that could only warm the air within a few feet of their flames. At night, with the fires banked low, the temperature in a bedroom could drop until your breath made clouds in the darkness. So the bed was a refuge, a small warm cave created by your own body heat, held in by layers of blankets and the curtains that blocked the drafts. Waking meant leaving that warmth. It meant facing the cold room. The maid would enter first, quietly, carefully, in case the mistress was still sleeping. She would stir the fire, add coals, coax the flames back to life. The room would begin to warm, slowly, unevenly. Near the fire, almost comfortable. Across the room, still frigid. Then the washing. Water brought up in ewers. Heavy ceramic pitchers carried from the kitchen below. The water was cold, usually, sometimes warmed over the fire if the household was wealthy enough, organized enough, if the maid had time. But often cold. You learned to be quick about it. A cloth dampened and passed over face and hands and neck. Perhaps rosewater or lavender water added for scent. Not a bath. Baths were rare events, special occasions, requiring enormous preparation. Water heated in the kitchen, carried up in buckets, poured into a metal tub, cooled before you could even climb in. Most people bathed a few times a year at most. So a washing, a freshening, a wiping away of the night, and then the dressing. This is where time began to disappear. To dress in the 18th century, truly dress, for a woman of any station above the poorest, was an undertaking that could take an hour or more. It required assistance, it required patience, it required a complete reshaping of the body into the silhouette that fashion demanded. First, the shift. The simple linen garment worn against the skin, like a long loose nightgown, serving as a barrier between body and clothing. This was the one thing a woman might put on herself. Then the stays. The stays were the foundation of everything. Bone structures, whalebone usually, or sometimes wood or metal, that encased the torso from breast to hip. They were not designed to make the waist impossibly small, not in this era. That would come later, in the 19th century. Instead, they created a shape, a smooth cone from shoulder to waist, breasts lifted and pushed together, back held straight. They were a kind of architecture, really, a scaffolding on which everything else was built. The maid would hold the stays while the mistress fitted her arms through the straps. Then the lacing began. Laces up the back, pulled tight, tighter, until the stays gripped the body like hands. You could not do this yourself. The laces were behind you, unreachable. You needed someone else. You were, in this most basic way, dependent. How did it feel to wear stays? The accounts vary. Some women wrote of them as torture, the difficulty of breathing deeply, the bruises left by the boning, the relief of unlacing at night. Others barely mentioned them, as if they were simply part of life, unremarkable as shoes or stockings. Most women of this era had worn stays since childhood. Their bodies had adapted, grown into the shape the stays created. What feels unbearable when new can become unremarkable when familiar. Then the petticoats. Layer upon layer. The number varied by fashion, by season, by occasion. In the 1,760 seconds, skirts were wide, supported by panniers, frameworks of wire or cane that extended the hips to either side, sometimes so dramatically that a woman could not fit through a normal doorway without turning sideways. These were for formal occasions. For a quiet afternoon at home, the petticoats might be simpler, but still multiple. A plain one closest to the body, a quilted one for warmth, a decorated one that might show beneath the outer gown. Then the gown itself. Usually in two pieces, a bodice and a skirt, though they might be sewn together or separate. The bodice hooked or pinned into place, fitted closely over the stays, often with a decorative front panel called a stomacher that filled the gap where the bodice didn't quite meet. The skirt tied at the waist, flowing over the petticoats beneath. Then the accessories. A cap or other hair covering for modesty. A respectable woman rarely showed her bare hair at home. A fichu, a type of kerchief, tucked into the neckline for modesty, softening the expanse of displayed bosom. Perhaps a small apron for domestic work, decorative rather than functional for women of means. And the hair. In the 1,760 seconds, hair was beginning its dramatic rise toward the towering structures that would characterize the 1,770 seconds and 1,780 seconds. But even a modest arrangement required work. The hair would be dressed with pomade, a greasy substance that held it in shape, and perhaps powdered white or grey. It would be pinned, curled, arranged. A maid with nimble fingers and an understanding of the current style was essential. All of this before breakfast. All of this before the day had properly begun. Imagine waking tomorrow knowing that simply getting dressed, not choosing what to wear, but the physical act of putting garments on your body would take you an hour. That there would be another person involved, someone whose hands would touch your body, whose help you could not do without, that you could not reach the fastenings yourself, that your body, once dressed, would be held in a shape not its natural one, a shape determined by fashion and society and expectations you had absorbed so completely you no longer questioned them. This was ordinary. This was simply how things were. Women did not think of it as oppression, mostly. They did not experience it as constraint, mostly. It was just life. The water of the fish, invisible because ubiquitous. And so the morning, what we would call morning, was often half gone by the time a woman was dressed and had taken her breakfast. Breakfast itself was lighter than we might expect. The big meal of the day was dinner, served in the afternoon or early evening. Breakfast was something to tide you over. Chocolate, perhaps, thick and rich and warming. Coffee, which had become fashionable. Bread or rolls with butter, eaten often in her private rooms before the mistress descended to face the household. Then, the duties. For a woman like Marie-Anne, managing a household was work. Even if she never scrubbed a floor or carried a coal scuttle, there were servants to oversee, accounts to check. The money that came in, the money that went out, the careful balance that kept a household running, menus to approve. The cook needed to know what to prepare, what ingredients to procure, disputes to settle, servants quarrelled, and someone had to mediate. Standards to maintain. Was the silver polished? The floors swept? The linens fresh? There were children in the nursery to visit, if she had them. By Marie-Anne's age, her children were older, a son at school, daughters being educated at home or in a convent, but they still needed attention, supervision, the guiding hand of a mother even when nurses and governesses did the daily work. There was correspondence, invitations to answer. Yes, she would attend the concert. No, she regretted she could not dine on Thursday. Notes to write. Congratulations on a birth. Condolences on a death. The endless maintenance of social connections, the letters from family to read and respond to, keeping the threads of relationship intact across distances. This took the late morning hours. This ate up the time between 10 and noon, between noon and 2 o'clock. And then, something shifted. The house grew quieter. The bustle of the morning, servants coming and going, doors opening and closing, voices calling instructions, began to fade. The urgent tasks were complete. The household machine was running, requiring less moment-to-moment attention. Dinner, the main meal, might not be served until 4 or 5 o'clock, or even later in fashionable circles. The evening's entertainment, whether a ball or a simple gathering, or just a quiet evening with family, would not begin until candles were lit and the world outside had gone dark. And in between these hours, the quiet hours, the liminal space, the gap in the day, the time that was, for a woman with some measure of privilege, almost her own. Why did this gap exist? Partly it was the structure of the day itself, meals at odd hours, entertainments in the evening, leaving this empty middle. Partly it was the gendered division of time. Men had their work, their clubs, their public lives that pulled them away from home. Women were left in domestic spaces with their domestic duties, and once those duties were dispatched, something had to fill the hours. But it was also, perhaps, an unintended consequence of the system itself. A crack in the schedule, a space where the demands loosened just enough for something else to grow. Reading, writing, thinking, dreaming. The afternoon was a kind of permission. Not freedom, never quite freedom, but something gentler. Space. Hannah, our English merchant's wife in Bristol, knew this same rhythm, though her mornings were different. She might rise earlier, 7 or 8, not 9 or 10. She had no lady's maid to help her dress. She managed her stays herself, or called on a daughter or a servant girl who had other duties too. Her breakfast was simpler, her household smaller, her responsibilities more hands-on, but she too managed accounts. The household money her husband allocated, stretched and balanced, and made to cover everything. She too consulted with servants, fewer of them, a cook and a maid or two, but still needing direction. She might help in her husband's shop sometimes, keeping the accounts or minding the counter when he was called away. She visited the market herself, selecting the day's food, her practiced eye judging the freshness of fish and the ripeness of fruit. By early afternoon, her work too would ease. The shop would quiet. The dinner would be in preparation, managed now by the cook. She might have an hour, 2 hours, time that was hers, or nearly hers. And Gertrude, in her Saxon parsonage, would find her own version of this pause. She rose early, as rural people did, the rhythms of the household tied to the rhythms of the sun. Her mornings were full of the work of a pastor's wife, receiving parishioners who came with problems, preparing food for the poor, teaching the catechism to children, managing the modest household that the church provided. But by afternoon, the children grown and gone, her husband at his studies or visiting the sick, she might have hours to herself, hours to sit by the window with her mending, hours to walk in the village if the weather was fine, hours to host a neighbour for coffee and the slow, comfortable conversation of women who have known each other for decades. The quiet hours existed across classes, across countries, across circumstances. They looked different in Paris and Bristol and Saxony. They meant different things to a countess and a merchant's wife and a pastor's widow. But they existed. A space in the day. A gap. A breath. For working women, for the servants who made these quiet hours possible, for the labourers and the poor, there was no such pause. We will honour them too, before our night is done. Margot, in Marie Anne's kitchen, was already preparing the evening meal while her mistress sat in peaceful silence. Agnes, at her lace pillow in her English cottage, was counting the hours of light remaining, calculating how many more inches of precious lace she could complete before dark. But for women with means, with time, with even a modest amount of leisure, the afternoon was a kind of island, a place between demands, a room of one's own, if only for an hour or two. And what they did with it tells us something profound about who they were, about who we still are. Take a breath now. Let your body soften. Feel the quiet around you, wherever you are, the night outside, or the darkened room, the pause in your own day, this hour you're giving to rest. We're going to explore what happened in these hours. What books were read, what letters written, what small rebellions took shape in quiet rooms. But for now, just feel the shape of it. The slow morning, the pause at midday, the opening of time. Let your jaw release. Let your hands go loose on the blanket. Soon, we will drift to a sunlit parlour, a novel hidden inside a book of sermons, a woman reading words she was told she shouldn't read, but not yet. For now, rest here. I'm still here. A knock at the door. Marie Anne looks up from her embroidery. She knew the visitors were coming. They'd left their cards yesterday, signalling their intention to call. But still there is a moment of adjustment, a shift in posture, a rearrangement of face into expression of welcome. The quiet of the afternoon must now become something else. The servant appears in the doorway, announces the names. 2 women enter. Marie Anne rises, sets aside her embroidery frame, arranges her features into a smile that shows pleasure at seeing them, warmth without excessive enthusiasm, dignity without coldness. The dance begins. Social calling was one of the most elaborate rituals of 18th century life. For women, especially, it was almost inescapable. If you had any pretension to respectability, any place in society, any connections to maintain, you received visitors in the afternoon. You made visits in return. You navigated a complex web of obligation and expectation that governed when you could call, how long you should stay, what you could say, how you should dress, what refreshments might or might not be offered. There were rules for everything, unwritten, mostly, but as binding as law. You announced your intention to visit by leaving your card, not showing up unannounced. That would be shockingly rude. Instead, You sent a servant with your card, a small printed rectangle bearing your name, to be left at the house of the person you wish to see. The card went on a tray in the front hall, where it waited to be examined, considered, sorted. The household's mistress would review the cards that had accumulated. She would decide whom to receive and whom to turn away. To receive meant you were welcome to call at the appointed time, usually the following day, within the hours designated for such visits. To turn away meant not at home, a polite fiction that rarely indicated literal absence. It simply meant the mistress was choosing not to see you. Perhaps she was busy. Perhaps she was unwell. Or perhaps she was sending a message, "You are not welcome here. Your status is insufficient. Our connection is severed." The not at home was a powerful social weapon. It could be wielded surgically, refusing one caller while receiving another on the same afternoon, or broadly, closing the door to everyone during a period of mourning or illness. Persistent refusals could destroy a woman's social standing, marking her as someone to be avoided. But today, Marie-Anne is receiving. The visitors are expected, their cards having arrived yesterday, and Marie-Anne is prepared. Her dress is appropriate, elegant enough to show respect for her guests, not so elaborate as to seem she is trying too hard. The parlour has been tidied, the fire lit, the best chairs positioned for conversation. Refreshments are ready in case they are needed. Tea and small cakes, probably, though whether to offer them depends on the length and intimacy of the visit. The two women who enter are acquaintances of some years. One, Madame Fournier, is a neighbour, someone with whom Marie-Anne has shared 1,000 afternoons like this one. Their connection is easy, familiar. The other, Madame de Beaumont, is newer to their circle, younger, recently married into a family of some distinction, still learning the intricate steps of social navigation. They exchange greetings. The words are formal but warm. "How well you look. What a pleasure to see you. I hope you are in good health." Marie-Anne gestures to chairs. They sit. The arrangement is precise. Madame Fournier in the chair of honour nearest the fire. Madame de Beaumont on a smaller chair slightly to the side. Marie-Anne in her own place by the window, where the light falls on her embroidery frame if she chooses to pick it up again. The conversation begins. What can they talk about? Everything and nothing. The weather, of course. The unexpected cold of this April. The hope that May will bring warmth. Fashion. A new style of trimming that has appeared in the shops. A shade of blue that is becoming popular. Entertainments. The concert planned for next week. The play they attended last month. The masquerade ball that was a great success or a disappointing failure. The health of mutual acquaintances. Have you heard that Madame Desforges is unwell? I'm told she's taken to her bed. Such a worry. What can they not talk about? Money, specifically. It was vulgar to discuss amounts, debts, financial difficulties, anything that might cause embarrassment, scandal, unless they were intimate enough friends to risk it, and even then, the scandal had to be approached obliquely, wrapped in euphemism and deniability. Politics, especially in mixed company. Women were not supposed to have political opinions, or at least not to voice them in social settings. Religion. With any heat, polite mentions of church attendance were acceptable. And most of all, anything that might suggest depth of feeling, anything that might expose vulnerability, fear, despair, overwhelming joy. Social calls were performances of calm, of pleasantness, of smooth surfaces without cracks. Marie-Anne plays her part. She asks, after Madame Fournier's grandchildren, genuine interest here, for she has watched those children grow. She admires Madame de Beaumont's dress, a small compliment that signals acceptance, that welcomes the newcomer into the fold. She shares a harmless piece of news. The painter has been engaged to touch up the portrait in the gallery. Would they like to see it when it's complete? The conversation flows. It is easy because they are practiced at it, because these are the steps they have danced 1,000 times before. And yet beneath the smooth surface, information is moving. Madame de Beaumont mentions, seemingly in passing, that her husband has received a new appointment. This is social positioning, an announcement of rising status, a claim to greater importance. Marie-Anne and Madame Fournier will pass this news to others. The de Beaumonts are ascending. Madame Fournier mentions that she will be travelling to Lyon next month to visit her daughter. This is a preemptive explanation. She will not be available for calls, will not be hosting, will be absent from the social scene. No one should take her absence as a snub. She is simply not here. Marie-Anne offers a slight compliment to Madame de Beaumont's taste in ribbons. This is acceptance. The newcomer is being welcomed, approved, marked as someone worthy of attention. Other women will notice. The de Beaumont woman is one of us. Gossip, we might call this. And we say the word dismissively now, as if gossip were trivial, frivolous, unimportant. But gossip was how information moved. It was how women knew who was doing well and who was struggling, who could be trusted and who had failed, who was rising and who had fallen. In a world where women had little formal power, this informal network of information and reputation was its own kind of currency. A word of approval could open doors. A whisper of disapproval could close them. The social call was the marketplace where these words were traded. The clock chimes. 15 minutes have passed. The formal visit is ending. Madame de Beaumont rises, makes her excuses. She has other calls to make, other performances to deliver. She thanks Marie-Anne for receiving her. She hopes they will meet again soon. The words are conventional, but the meaning is genuine. She is grateful to have been welcomed. Madame Fournier rises too, but she hesitates. She glances at Marie-Anne. There is a question in her look. "Would you stay a moment?" Marie-Anne asks. The words are soft, private, not part of the formal script. Madame de Beaumont understands. She makes her farewells, kisses air near cheeks, departs with grace. The servant sees her out, and then the room changes. Madame Fournier settles back into her chair. Marie-Anne lets out a breath. The tension in her shoulders releases, just slightly. The performance is over, or at least it has shifted to a different kind of performance, a more intimate one. "She's not as foolish as she seems," Madame Fournier says, meaning Madame de Beaumont. "But she's trying too hard. It shows." Marie-Anne nods. "She'll learn. We all did." There is silence, a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who have known each other long enough that they don't need to fill every gap with words. "How are you really?" Madame Fournier asks. The question is different now. Not the polite inquiry of formal visiting, but a genuine question from a genuine friend. Marie-Anne considers her answer. She could say what she is supposed to say. Fine, well, blessed. But Madame Fournier is watching her with eyes that have seen her through difficult times. The miscarriage 12 years ago, the illness that followed, the dark months when she could barely rise from bed. "I am tired," she says finally. "I don't know why. I sleep well enough, but I wake tired, and the days exhaust me. And I find myself wondering if this is what the rest of my life will be. This tiredness, this emptiness." The words hang in the air. They are dangerous words. They expose something that should be hidden. Madame Fournier reaches across and takes her hand, just for a moment, just long enough to say, this was the other face of social calling. Beneath the ritual, within the constraints, genuine connection was possible. The women who called on each other week after week, year after year, became familiar in ways that formal structures could not contain. They knew each other's sorrows, each other's fears. They held each other's secrets. The system was not only oppression, it was also, sometimes, survival. The network of social calls kept women connected, kept them from the isolation that might otherwise have swallowed them. Within the cage, there were moments of flight. Take a breath, let it go slowly. Hannah, in Bristol, navigates a simpler version of the same system. She pays calls on her peers, other merchants' wives, women of her approximate station. The conversations are similar. The stakes are different. A good word from Mrs. Patterson might send customers to her husband's shop. A bad word, a whispered disapproval of Mrs. Morley's housekeeping, her manners, her children's behaviour could keep them away. Trade follows reputation. Reputation is built in parlours, over tea, in the words women say to one another. Hannah is acutely aware of this. Every visit is, in part, a performance. Every smile is, in part, strategic. She must be pleasant, proper, modest, but not meek. She must display just enough prosperity to inspire confidence, not so much as to invite resentment. She must be pious without being priggish, thrifty without being cheap, kind without being weak. The exhaustion of it, the constant calibration, and yet she too has her genuine friends, her intimates, the neighbour she can speak freely with when the formal calls are done, the sister-in-law who shares her complaints over kitchen table tea, the woman she has known since girlhood, now married and moved across town, whom she meets when she can and trusts when she must. These friendships sustained women through the long centuries when friendship was often the only relationship a woman could choose for herself. Husbands were selected by family, children were assigned by nature, servants were hired by necessity. But friends you picked, friends who picked you back, friends who saw you when everyone else saw only the role you performed. Let your body sink deeper into the mattress. Feel the weight of the blankets holding you. Visiting is done for today. The callers have departed. The parlour is quiet again. Marie Anne sits alone, her embroidery forgotten, her thoughts drifting. Outside the window, the sun is sinking toward evening. The golden light is thickening, deepening, turning the green of the garden into something richer. Soon she will need to dress for dinner. Soon the evening will begin, with its own rituals and demands. But for now, there is this pause, this breath between performances. Let your eyes close if they're heavy. Let the day's own calls and conversations fade. Soon we'll explore what happened when women turned to their writing desks. The letters they composed, the diaries they kept, the ways they preserved themselves in ink. But for now, rest in the quiet that follows company, the relief of being alone, the echoes of conversation fading into stillness. I'm still here. The pen scratches across paper. Hannah sits at her writing desk, the one she inherited from her mother, dark wood polished by generations of hands. The inkwell is open, the candle lit, even though the afternoon light has not entirely faded. She needs more light than the window provides, especially for this work that requires attention to every letter, every word. She is writing to her sister, Sarah. The letter has been forming in her mind all day, perhaps all week. Now it is taking shape on paper, the words becoming visible, permanent, real. "My dearest Sarah," she begins. The salutation is always the same. Dearest, because Sarah is dear to her, the dearest person in the world next to her own children, the only one who remembers their mother's voice, their father's laugh, the smell of the house where they grew up. I hope this finds you well, and that the children have recovered from their colds. Send them my love, and tell them their aunt thinks of them every day. The pleasantries first. The conventional opening that lets Sarah know all is well enough, that this is not an emergency letter, not bad news, not something that requires immediate action, just the regular correspondence that keeps them connected across the miles between Bristol and London. Then, the news. The small details that seem barely worth recording, but that become precious when you are separated from those you love. The weather continues cold for April. We had frost 3 nights this past week, which has done no good to the garden. I fear for the herbs, though the cook says they will recover if we cover them well. Weather. It seems trivial, but weather was different then, a force that shaped daily life in ways we have forgotten. Cold meant discomfort, difficulty, danger. Frost meant food might be lost. The weather was news worth sharing because it was experience worth sharing. Mr. Morley is well. Busy with the accounts, as always, in springtime. He sends his regards and hopes Mr. Thompson's business continues to prosper. Her husband. The conventional mention. He is well. He is working. He sends his regards. She says nothing of the tension that has stretched between them these past weeks. The disagreement about money that simmers beneath the surface of their days. That is not for letters. Even letters to Sarah. Some things are kept even from sisters. The girls continue their studies. Elizabeth is making good progress with her French, and even Martha has stopped complaining about her needlework, or at least has learned to complain more quietly, which I suppose is a kind of progress. Her daughters. Here her voice warms, even on paper. The pride she feels in them, the worry, the hope, all of it compressed into a few sentences that say more than they seem to. And then she pauses, sets down her pen, stares out the window at the grey afternoon. There is something else she wants to say, something harder. The letter has been leading toward it, circling around it, approaching and retreating. She picks up the pen again. You asked, in your last, whether I am happy here, and I find I do not know how to answer. The words come slowly now, each one chosen, weighed, set down like a stone crossing a stream. I am not unhappy. That is the truth of it. My life is comfortable enough. Mr. Morley is a good man, better than many husbands. My children are healthy. The house is warm. I have no cause for complaint, and I know many women who would be grateful for half what I have. But there is a restlessness in me lately that I cannot name. A feeling of, I don't know what to call it. Waiting, perhaps. As if something was supposed to happen, something is supposed to begin, and it never quite does. The days pass. I do my work. I make my calls. I see to the household. And at the end of each day, I think, is this all? Is this what life is? This sameness, day after day, until we are old? She stops, reads what she has written. It is more than she meant to say, more than she should say, perhaps. Sarah will worry. Sarah will not know what to do with this confession, this exposure of something that is supposed to remain hidden. But the words are there now, black ink on cream paper, and there is something in her that does not want to take them back. I am sorry. I don't mean to burden you. I suppose I am only tired, and tired makes everything seem darker than it is. Forget I wrote this. Tell me about your life instead. I want to hear about the new dressmaker, and whether you have decided about the school for the boys, and what you are reading this month. The pivot back to pleasantness, the retreat into safer territory. But the hard words remain there, on the page, undeniable. This was the power of letters. They could hold what conversations could not. In speech, words dissolved as soon as they were uttered. You could always deny, qualify, take back, but a letter was physical, lasting, potentially permanent. It could be read and reread. It could be shown to others, a risk, always a risk. It could be kept for decades, discovered after death, used as evidence of things you never meant to be known. And yet women wrote. They wrote constantly, voluminously, pouring their lives onto paper in quantities that would stagger us now. The 18th century was the golden age of letter writing, before telephones, before telegraphs, before even a truly reliable postal system. Letters were how you stayed connected to anyone beyond walking distance. They were the only way to maintain relationships across space, the only way to know what was happening in other places, the only way to preserve your own existence in the minds of those you could not see. A letter was not a text message. It was not a quick note dashed off between other activities. Writing a letter was an undertaking that might take an hour, 2 hours, an entire afternoon. You had to prepare your materials. Paper, which was expensive and carefully chosen. Ink, which you might make yourself from recipes involving oak galls and iron. Pens, quills that required sharpening, constant attention, skill to use well. You had to compose your thoughts, arrange your words, copy them out in fair hand, suitable for reading, and then you had to send it. The postal system existed, but it was expensive, paid for by the recipient, usually with costs calculated by distance and the number of sheets. You wrote small, cramming words onto the page, because an extra sheet meant extra cost. You crossed your lines, writing first horizontally, then turning the paper 90 degrees and writing vertically over the same words, because density saved money. You sealed the letter with wax, pressing your seal or a borrowed seal into the soft material, creating a closure that would show any tampering. Privacy was not guaranteed. Letters could be opened by authorities, read by servants, intercepted by enemies, but the seal was a gesture toward privacy, an assertion that these words were meant for one reader only. And then you waited, days, weeks, sometimes months for a reply, depending on distance. The time between letters was an agony of wondering. Did the letter arrive? Did she read it? What did she think? Is she writing back? Each day without a response was a day of uncertainty, of imagining disasters, of hoping against hope. Hannah finishes her letter. 4 pages, closely written, crossing the lines on the final page where she ran out of space. She signs it, "Your loving sister, Hannah." She lets the ink dry, then folds the paper carefully. A specific series of folds that form the letter into its own envelope, the address written on the outside, the seal applied at the point where the folds meet. Tomorrow she will send it to the post office. In perhaps a week, Sarah will hold these pages in her hands, will read these words, will know, at least for a moment, what it feels like to be Hannah Morley in Bristol in the spring of 1775. Marie Anne writes letters too, though hers are different in tone and purpose. There are the formal letters, correspondence with distant relatives, with connections at court, with those whose goodwill must be maintained through regular communication. These are exercises in careful phrasing, nothing that could be misconstrued, nothing that could give offence, nothing that could be quoted out of context and used against her. The words are chosen with the care of a diplomat negotiating a treaty. Safe, polished, empty, but there are also the other letters, the ones to her closest friend, Madame d'Aumont, who married a provincial nobleman and moved to a chateau 2 days' journey from Paris. The ones to her sister, who she sees perhaps once a year but loves with the fierce, uncomplicated love of childhood. In these letters, Marie Anne can breathe. She can be witty, the sharp, satirical wit that she suppresses in polite company, where a woman who is too clever seems threatening. She can complain about her husband, his stubbornness, his obsessions, his failure to understand what she needs. She can worry about her children, her son's mediocre progress at school, her elder daughter's difficulty finding a suitable match, her younger daughter's mysterious melancholy. She can confess her doubts about God, about virtue, about whether she has lived the life she was supposed to live. These letters, she knows, should be burned. Both women know it. You do not leave such things to be found after your death, to scandalize your children and tarnish your memory. Madame d'Urmont burns Marianne's letters as soon as she has read them, twice, usually, savouring the words before committing them to the flames. Marianne does the same. The intimacy is fleeting. The evidence disappears. But in the moment of writing, in the moment of reading, something real passes between them, something true, and some letters were not burned. Some survived. Lady Mary Wortley Montagu's letters from Constantinople, describing Turkish baths and women's quarters and customs that shocked and fascinated English readers, were copied and circulated and eventually published. Fanny Burney's letters, along with her extensive diaries, preserved a world in such vivid detail that we can practically walk through the rooms she described, hear the conversations she recorded. German pietist women wrote of their spiritual struggles with an intensity that still moves readers today. The dark night of the soul, the wrestling with God, the glimpses of grace that made the struggle worthwhile. French aristocratic women's letters chronicled the elaborate social life of the old regime, the rituals and intrigues and pleasures that would be swept away by revolution. These women wrote themselves into existence. And then there were the diaries. Marianne keeps a diary. She has kept one since girlhood, since the convent where she was educated, where the nuns taught the practice of examining one's conscience each evening. You were supposed to review your day, note your sins and failings, trace your progress toward virtue. You were supposed to be honest with yourself, because God saw all, and there was no point in lying. She no longer believes in the God the nuns described. She is not sure what she believes. Perhaps a distant clockmaker who set the universe in motion and now observes without interfering. Perhaps nothing at all. The examination of conscience feels hollow now, a ritual emptied of meaning. But the habit of the diary remains. Each evening, before bed, she writes a few lines, sometimes just a record of the day, what she did, whom she saw, what the weather was like, sometimes something more. I am 35 years old today, halfway to 70 if I am lucky, more than halfway if I am not. The birthday passed with the usual celebrations, gifts from the children, a dinner with friends, words of congratulation that mean nothing. And I find myself wondering, what have I done with this life? What will I be remembered for, if I am remembered at all? Another night, another entry. I dreamed last night of the house where I grew up. My mother was there, young again, the way I remember her from childhood. She was calling to me, but I could not reach her. I woke with tears on my face and the strangest sense of loss, as if something precious had been taken from me, though I cannot say what. And another. The Comte was in a temper today. I do not know the cause. I rarely do. I have learned to stay out of his way when the mood is on him. It passes, usually, in a day or two, but I wonder, sometimes, what he sees when he looks at me. Does he see a person at all? Or just a position? His wife, the mother of his children, a piece of furniture that serves a function? She does not show this diary to anyone. She has thought about burning it, as she burns her letters. But something stays her hand, the need to exist, perhaps, to leave a mark, to prove to herself that she is real, that her inner life matters, that there is more to her than the performance everyone else sees. The diary is the closest she comes to telling the truth. Take a breath. Let it out slowly. Think about the letters you might write, if you had an afternoon and a pen, and someone you trusted at the other end. The things you might say, the truth you might tell. You don't have to write them now. You don't have to tell anyone anything tonight. Just let yourself remember that somewhere, in everyone's life, there is someone who might understand, someone worth writing to, someone worth telling the truth. Let your body soften into the bed. Let your hands rest. Soon we will step outside, into gardens and pathways, into the complicated freedom of fresh air. But for now, rest here, in the quiet, in the company of all the women who wrote themselves down and were not entirely lost. I'm still here. The book lies open on her lap. Marie-Anne is reading. The light from the tall window falls across the page in a bright rectangle, illuminating words that pull her away from the room, away from Paris, away from her own life, and into something else entirely. The book she holds is bound in brown leather, tooled with gold in a pattern of vines and flowers. It looks respectable. It looks expensive. On the spine, a title in Latin, something about sermons, about the lives of the saints, a book her husband would approve of if he happened to glance at it, a book her confessor might nod at if he noticed it on her table. But inside, hidden within those sober covers, is something else entirely. A novel. She had the binding made specially, paid a craftsman to remove the original covers and replace them with these deceptive ones. It felt daring at the time, almost wicked. A small conspiracy between herself and the bookbinder, who asked no questions but whose eyes had held a knowing glint. Now it feels necessary, essential. The only way to have this thing she needs, this escape, this window into other lives. Her heart beats a little faster as she reads. The story is scandalous, at least, that's what the moralists say. A young woman, a man who pursues her, letters exchanged in secret, meetings in gardens, passions that proper people don't discuss in parlours, feelings that proper women are not supposed to have. Marie-Anne's eyes move across the page. Her lips are slightly parted. She has forgotten her embroidery frame entirely, forgotten the household waiting beyond the door, forgotten her own name. Almost, she is not Marie-Anne, Comtesse de Bellegarde, wife and mother and manager of an estate. She is no one. She is everyone. She is the girl in the story, feeling the rush of forbidden emotion, the terror and delight of being alive. This was the secret pleasure of countless 18th century afternoons. We take novels for granted now. They line our shelves, fill our phones, stack beside our beds. But in the 18th century, the novel was something new, something revolutionary, something dangerous. Before the novel, there had been romances, long tales of knights and ladies, of improbable adventures, clearly removed from everyday life. There had been moral tales and religious allegories, stories designed to instruct rather than to entertain. There had been plays and poems, but those were performed or recited, not consumed alone in the privacy of a quiet room. The novel was different. The novel was intimate. It was written in prose, like a letter from a friend. It described ordinary people in recognizable situations. It got inside their heads, showed their thoughts, revealed their feelings. When you read a novel, you were not watching from a distance. You were there. You were inside. In 1740, a printer in London published a book called Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded. The author was Samuel Richardson, a middle-aged printer who had never written fiction before. The book told the story of a servant girl resisting her master's attempts at seduction. It was written as a series of letters, Pamela's letters to her parents, describing her trials and temptations. The effect was explosive. Women devoured the book. They could not put it down. They stayed up reading by candlelight until the candles guttered and died. They lent their copies to friends and begged to borrow them back. They argued about the ending, about whether Pamela was truly virtuous or secretly calculating, about whether the master deserved his redemption. They wept. They laughed. They wrote letters to Richardson himself, as if Pamela were a real person they needed to advise. It sparked something, a hunger, a recognition, the sense that finally, someone was telling the truth about what it felt like to be a woman in an impossible situation. Richardson followed Pamela with Clarissa, an even longer novel about a young woman whose family pressures her into a terrible marriage. It was darker, more complex, more devastating. Women read it and wept for days. They mourned Clarissa as if she had been a real person they had known and loved and lost. By the time Mary Ann was reading in her parlour in the 1760 seconds, the novel had conquered Europe. In France, Rousseau had published Julie, or The New Heloise, a love story told in letters that became one of the century's bestsellers. Women read it and recognized themselves, the constrained life, the forbidden passion, the yearning for something more than duty and obedience. In England, novelists like Henry Fielding and Tobias Smollett wrote sprawling adventures, but women favoured the more intimate tales of Frances Burney and others who understood what it was like to navigate society's expectations with limited power and endless scrutiny. The novel was becoming, slowly, a women's form, written by women often, read by women largely, concerned with women's lives, their choices, their inner worlds. And this was precisely what made it suspect. Men wrote essays in periodicals, warning about the dangers of fiction. Novels would corrupt women's morals, they said. The stories were too vivid, too affecting, too likely to stir up emotions that should remain dormant. Women would get ideas. Women would develop expectations. Women would compare the passionate heroes of novels to their own humdrum husbands and find reality wanting. Worse, novels would make women lazy. The hours spent reading were hours not spent in useful occupation, sewing, managing, attending to domestic duties. A woman absorbed in a novel was a woman neglecting her responsibilities. The very posture of reading, reclining, inactive, eyes fixed on pages rather than work, suggested a dangerous idleness. And there was something else, something harder to name but perhaps more threatening still. When a woman read a novel, she was alone, alone with her thoughts, her reactions, her unwitnessed emotions. No one could know what she was thinking as she turned the pages. No one could supervise her internal experience. She was, in those hours, truly private, truly free. This frightened the moralists. A woman's mind was supposed to be an open book, readable by husband and father and confessor. A woman who had a private inner life, a life fed by novels, shaped by stories, full of unspoken thoughts, was a woman who could not be entirely controlled. And so the war against novels was also, always, a war against women's privacy, against women's interiority, against the secret self that even the most dutiful wife or daughter might harbour within. Marie Anne knows all of this. She has read the sermons warning against fiction. She has heard her husband grumble about the frivolity of novels. She has nodded along, agreeing that yes, certainly, excessive reading is harmful, while hiding her own excessive reading behind false covers and closed doors. The hypocrisy does not trouble her much. You learn to live with contradictions. As a woman of her era, you learn that survival sometimes requires small deceptions. You learn that your inner life and your outer performance need not match. That there is a space between what you seem and what you are. And in that space, you can be yourself. The novel she is reading today, let us imagine it is Rousseau's Julie, tells the story of a woman trapped between love and duty. Julie loves her tutor, Saint-Preux, with a passion that consumes her, but she cannot marry him. He is below her station, and her father has other plans. She obeys. She marries the man her father chooses. She tries to be a good wife, a good mother, a good woman. But the love does not die. It burns beneath the surface of her respectable life. A flame that cannot be extinguished. Marie-Anne reads, and she feels something stir in her own chest. Is it recognition? Longing? Some mixture of both? Her own marriage was arranged. She was 16, and she barely knew the man who would become her husband. He was older, established, from a good family. The match was advantageous. She had no say in the matter. Not really. She could have refused, technically, but the pressure was immense. And what were the alternatives? A convent? Spinsterhood? Disgrace? She does not hate her husband. She does not love him either. Not the way Julie loves Saint-Preux, not with fire and yearning and desperate need. She respects him. She is grateful for his reasonable treatment of her, for the home he provides, for the children they have raised together. There are moments of genuine affection, even warmth, but there is also a distance, a gap, a place where love might live but doesn't. When she reads about Julie's passion, she wonders, what would it feel like? What would it be like to burn like that? She does not expect to find out. She is 35 years old, her life half over. Such things are for novels, not for her. But there is pleasure even in wondering. There is pleasure in visiting that burning, through fiction, without risking the destruction it would bring in real life. This is what novels offered. A safe place to feel dangerous things. A rehearsal. An exploration. A way to know what you had been denied without paying the price of claiming it. Take a breath. Let it fill your lungs slowly. Across the channel, in Bristol, Hannah was reading too. Her resources were more limited than Marie-Anne's. Books were expensive. Even cheaply printed ones cost what a working person might earn in a day. She could not afford to buy many. The novels that lined the shelves of richer women were beyond her means. But she had discovered the circulating library. These were commercial enterprises, springing up in towns across England, where anyone with a small subscription fee could borrow books. You paid by the quarter or by the year, and you were entitled to take out one volume at a time, returning it when you were done. The library kept records. Your name, the date, the book borrowed. Once a week, on Thursday afternoons, Hannah walked to the circulating library on High Street. She climbed the narrow stairs to the rooms above the print shop where the books were kept. She browsed the shelves, running her fingers over the spines, reading the titles. She knew what was popular. The other women in town talked about novels the way we might discuss television shows, sharing opinions, recommending favourites. She tried to keep up. Today she has borrowed a novel by Frances Burney. Evelina, the story of a young woman entering society for the first time. It is witty and sharp, and full of exactly the kind of social observations that Hannah recognizes from her own life. The embarrassments of not knowing the right thing to say, the terror of being judged, the delicate negotiations of status and reputation that governed every interaction. She reads in her parlour, by the window, where the light is best. Her reading time is more constrained than Marie-Anne's. She cannot spend all afternoon lost in fiction. There are things that need doing, but she guards this hour fiercely. It is hers. She has earned it. Hannah reads differently than Marie-Anne does. Less for escape, perhaps, and more for instruction. She reads to understand how the world works, how people of higher station behave, what mistakes to avoid. She reads to improve herself, a concept very much of her time and class. The idea that through effort and attention you could rise, could become better, could climb the ladder of respectability. But she also reads for pleasure. Pure, simple pleasure. The delight of a well-turned phrase. The satisfaction of a story that resolves itself justly, with the virtuous rewarded and the wicked punished. The company of characters who become, over the course of a novel, as familiar as friends. Reading was companionship for women who were often lonely. It was conversation when there was no one to talk to. It was a window when the walls closed in. And there were women who read more dangerously still, not novels, but philosophy, science, politics, the forbidden subjects that women were not supposed to trouble their pretty heads about. Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, in the earlier part of the century, had read voraciously. Latin and Greek, philosophy and history, the same education her brothers received. She married, travelled to Constantinople with her ambassador husband, and wrote letters back to England describing everything she saw with a sharp and curious eye. Her letters were copied, circulated, eventually published. She became famous for her intellect, admired and resented in equal measure. The Bluestocking Circle in London brought together women who wanted to talk about ideas rather than gossip. Elizabeth Montagu, a different woman entirely unrelated to Lady Mary, hosted gatherings where conversations centered on literature and philosophy, where women were expected to have opinions and to defend them. These women read the great thinkers of their age, Locke, Montesquieu, Voltaire, and discussed their ideas with as much vigour as any man. They were mocked, of course. The name Bluestocking was originally an insult, referring to the plain blue stockings worn by one of the men who attended these gatherings, implying a carelessness about fashion that suggested intellectual pretension. But the women claimed the name, wore it as a badge of honour. What did it feel like to be a woman with a mind hungry for ideas, in an age that told you your mind was inferior? That your education should prepare you for the drawing room, not the library? That too much thinking would damage your delicate constitution, unfit you for marriage and motherhood? It felt like hunger, probably. It felt like frustration. It felt like reading in secret, like hiding your books, like pretending to be less intelligent than you were, so that men wouldn't feel threatened. But it also felt like joy, the joy of understanding, the joy of connecting ideas, of following arguments, of suddenly grasping something that had eluded you before. The joy of knowing that your mind worked perfectly well, thank you, whatever the moralists might claim. Marianne finishes a chapter and closes the book carefully, making sure the false binding faces outward. The sermon covers gleam soberly in the afternoon light. Anyone glancing at the table would see a pious woman improving herself with religious reading. She has perhaps half an hour before her next visitor arrives. She might read a little more, or she might sit quietly, thinking about what she's read, processing it, letting it settle into her understanding of things. The sun has shifted. The rectangle of light has moved across the floor, sliding over polished wood and faded carpet. The dust motes still drift, lazily, through the warmth. Somewhere in the house, a door opens and closes. Footsteps in a distant corridor. Then, silence. Take a breath now. Slow and easy. There is something beautiful about this picture, isn't there? A woman and a book and the quiet afternoon. The intimacy of reading. The way it asks nothing of you except attention. The way it gives everything in return. Books are still like this, aren't they? Still a refuge. Still a window. Still a way to be someone else for an hour. To live a life you'll never live. To feel things you might never feel. If your eyes are heavy, let them close. Let the images of sunlit parlours and leather-bound books drift in your mind. Soon, we'll explore what women did when they set their books aside. The endless needlework, the way thread and cloth and patient stitching filled hours upon hours of their lives. But for now, rest here, in the quiet, in the company of readers, centuries gone, who understood what you understand, that a book can be a refuge, that words on a page can be a kind of freedom, that the quiet hours are precious precisely because they're rare. The light is soft, the room is still, I'm still here. Thread through the needle through the cloth, pull. Watch the thread follow, a thin line of colour against the pale linen. Watch it draw tight. Then again, thread through, needle through, pull. Hannah's hands move without thinking. They have done this for 30 years, since she was a girl of 7 or 8, sitting beside her mother in their small house in London, learning the stitches that every woman was expected to know. Her fingers find their own rhythm. Loop, pull, loop, pull. The motion is as natural as breathing, as automatic as heartbeat. She is sewing a shirt for her husband. Plain work. Practical work. Not decoration but necessity. The fabric is good linen, white and sturdy. She took care choosing it at the market, feeling the weave between her fingers, checking for flaws. When the shirt is finished, it will join the others in the chest upstairs. The neat stacks of shirts she has made and mended over 20 years of marriage. She does not count how many shirts she has made in her life. There is no number that would capture it. Hundreds, certainly, perhaps 1,000. Shirts and shifts and petticoats and caps, sheets and pillowcases and tablecloths, all the fabric needs of a household passing through her hands season after season, year after year. And while her hands work, her mind goes elsewhere. She is composing a letter to her sister, Sarah. She is telling Sarah about the new family that has moved into the house on Queen Street. Respectable people, it seems, a wine merchant and his wife and 3 children. She is describing the weather, which has been cold and wet for April. Unusual and unwelcome. She is wondering, carefully, tentatively, whether Sarah might visit this summer, whether the journey might be possible, whether they might spend a few days together, as they haven't done in nearly 2 years. Her hands keep moving. The shirt takes shape. The seams multiply, straight and even, invisible when the garment is finished, but essential to its structure. This was the texture of countless 18th century afternoons. Needlework. We tend to think of it narrowly. Embroidery, decorative stitching, pretty pictures made of silk thread on fine fabric. And that existed, certainly. Elaborate embroidery was a marker of status, a demonstration that a woman had both the skill and the leisure to create beautiful, useless things. But the reality was much broader, much more constant, much more woven into every aspect of daily life. Women sewed because everything needed sewing. Every shirt, every shift, every petticoat, every sheet, every tablecloth, every curtain, every napkin. The ready-made clothing industry barely existed. If you wanted clothes, someone had to make them, cutting fabric, piecing it together, stitching seam after seam. If clothes tore or wore through, someone had to mend them. If children grew, their garments had to be altered, let down, let out, remade. And that someone was almost always a woman. A woman of Marie Anne's station did not sew shirts for her husband. That work was done by servants, by seamstresses employed by the household, by poor women paid piece rates to produce the linens and garments a wealthy family required. But Marie Anne still spent hours with needle in hand. Different needlework for different purposes. The needlework of display rather than necessity. She embroidered. Embroidery was art and accomplishment both. A well-bred woman was expected to be proficient with her needle, able to produce decorative work that demonstrated her refinement. She might embroider fire screens to protect delicate complexions from the heat of the hearth. She might embroider chair cushions, small bags, picture frames, decorative panels to hang on walls. She might spend years on a single large piece, a tapestry or a needlework picture, working in coloured silks or wools, creating images of flowers or figures or pastoral scenes. The designs were often purchased, patterns drawn by professionals, sold in shops, transferred onto fabric with powder and pins, or they might be copied from print sources, adapted and personalised. A skilled embroiderer could work freehand, but most followed established patterns, adding their own touches within familiar forms. Marianne's current project is a fire screen. She is working in silk thread on a cream-colored ground, creating an arrangement of flowers, roses, and tulips and carnations. The stylized blooms that appear in so much decorative art of this era. The colors are rich, crimson and pink for the roses, yellow and orange for the tulips, deep red for the carnations, green in several shades for leaves and stems. She has been working on this piece for months. It occupies her afternoons when she has no visitors, fills the hours of waiting, gives her something to do with her hands when conversation lulls. When it is finished, perhaps by summer, it will be mounted in a wooden frame and placed before one of the fireplaces, where it will be admired by guests, and then, gradually, become invisible, just another piece of furniture in a room full of things. Does she love this work? That's a complicated question. Sometimes she does. There is satisfaction in watching the design emerge, in seeing the flat fabric come alive with color and form. There is pleasure in the rhythm of stitching, the meditative quality of repetitive motion, the way the mind can drift while the hands stay busy, and sometimes she hates it. Hates the expectation that she will always have something in her hands, that she must never be seen idle, that even her leisure must be productive. Hates the tedium, the eye strain, the ache in her shoulders from hunching over the frame. Hates that she cannot simply sit and think, sit and be, without something to show for the time. But these feelings, like so many of her feelings, remain unexpressed. She picks up her needle, she makes her stitches, she performs the role of the accomplished lady, even when no one is watching. Here's the thing that often gets forgotten. Needlework was both a demand and a refuge. It was demanded because women were not supposed to be idle. Idle hands were the devil's workshop. The phrase existed then as now, and was applied to women with particular force. A lady reading a novel was suspect. Too absorbed, too lazy, too lost in imagination, too far from the proper domestic sphere. But a lady with an embroidery frame was beyond reproach. Her hands were busy. She was producing something, even if that something was merely decorative. She was fulfilling her role. The expectation was constant. Even in company, especially in company, a woman was expected to have some work in her hands. When visitors came, when she sat with her family in the evening, when she gathered with other women for tea or conversation, the needlework came out. To sit with empty hands was to invite comment, to appear lazy, undisciplined, perhaps even unwell. But within this expectation was also freedom. When your hands are occupied with a task they know by heart, your mind can go anywhere. This is something any knitter knows, any quilter, any person who works with their hands. The repetitive motion becomes almost hypnotic. The need to concentrate just enough keeps you anchored in your body, present in the moment. But your thoughts can drift wherever they choose. What did women think about while they sewed? We can only guess. But we can guess with some confidence. They thought about their children, their husbands, their worries and their hopes. They composed letters in their heads, as Hannah does. They prayed, perhaps. The rhythm of stitching was not unlike the rhythm of rosary beads, a physical cadence that could support spiritual reflection. They daydreamed. They worked through problems, turned over ideas, processed the emotions they had no other outlet for. The needle was permission to be inward, permission to be silent, permission to be somewhere else entirely, while appearing to be exactly where you were supposed to be. And sometimes, in the stitching itself, women spoke. Samplers were the training ground. Young girls learned to sew by making samplers, pieces of fabric on which they practiced stitches, alphabets, numbers, and decorative motifs. The sampler was both education and record, demonstrating a girl's proficiency, often signed and dated like a diploma. Many samplers included verses, pious verses, usually lines from scripture, moral exhortations, reminders of duty and obedience. These were the words girls were taught to value, the sentiments they were trained to hold in their hearts. But sometimes the verses were different. Sometimes a girl stitched something subversive, a complaint about her lot, a moment of rebellion, a tiny protest preserved in thread. When I was young and in my prime, I made this sampler to pass the time. My parents and friends, they did their best to teach me how to behave with the rest. These seem innocent, but read them again, hear the resignation, the irony, and sometimes women embroidered messages that only they could read. Hidden symbols, secret meanings, a flower that stood for a lost love, a colour that carried a private significance. Mourning embroidery, worked in sombre silks after a death, kept the memory of the departed alive in a way that words could not. The needle was a voice, a quiet one, a deniable one, but a voice nonetheless. Gertrude, in her Saxon parsonage, sewed because she must. The family had little money for new clothes. What they had must last. Her afternoons were filled with darning, that patient, painstaking repair of worn fabric, building thread upon thread to fill the hole where the weave had given way. She darned stockings, shirts, tablecloths, anything that could be saved rather than discarded. She patched. She let out seams and let down hems as children grew. She unpicked old garments and remade them into new ones. The fabric worn but still sound, shaped into something that would serve a few more years. There was nothing romantic about this work. It was often tedious, especially as her eyes grew weaker with age, and she had to hold the fabric close, squinting to see the fine threads she was manipulating. Her fingers cramped, her back ached, but the work was necessary. And yet she took pride in it too, in the invisible mend, the patch that blended perfectly with the fabric around it, in the garment saved, the stocking restored, the extended life of things she cared for. Her skill was its own satisfaction, even when the work was endless. Picture, for a moment, a room full of women sewing. Perhaps it is a drawing room in England. In the afternoon, 5 or 6 women have gathered. The hostess sits in the best chair, near the window where the light is good. Her guests arrange themselves on sofas and smaller chairs, each with her own work, embroidery, knitting, mending, delicate lacework. They are talking. The conversation rises and falls like music. Gossip about acquaintances, advice about children, complaints about servants, observations about the weather, opinions about a book they've read, a play they've seen. The talk is light, but it matters. This is how information moves, how reputations are made and unmade, how women know who can be trusted and who cannot. But beneath the talk, there is another rhythm. The rhythm of needles moving, hands working, eyes that drop to fabric and rise to faces and drop again. The click of knitting needles, if anyone is knitting. The soft pull of thread through cloth. There is something almost hypnotic about it. Something communal. These women are doing something together, even though each has her own project. Their bodies move in similar patterns. Their hands perform similar gestures. They are connected by the work, even as they are connected by the words. Needlework gatherings were among the few socially acceptable ways for women to spend time together. You could call it useful, productive, virtuous. You could claim that the conversation was incidental, secondary to the work. But in truth, the work was often secondary to the conversation. The needlework was permission. Permission to gather. Permission to talk. Permission to be together. Hannah sews alone today. She has been part of such gatherings. The quilting bees of her youth in London, when neighbour women came together to complete a quilt for a bride or a new mother. The sewing circles of Bristol, where merchants' wives gather on Wednesday afternoons, each with her work, all with their gossip. There is pleasure in solitude too. In the quiet of her parlour, with no one watching, no conversation to maintain, she can let her thoughts wander where they will. The shirt takes shape under her hands. The afternoon passes. Time measured in stitches, in seams completed, in inches of fabric transformed from flat goods into garment. Take a breath now. Feel the weight of your body on the bed. Imagine the feel of cloth beneath your fingers. The slight resistance of thread pulling through fabric. The satisfaction of a stitch made neatly, a pattern taking shape. There is something meditative in this, isn't there? Something calming. The repetition, the slow progress. The way time seems to both stand still and flow past while your hands are busy. You don't have to sew tonight. You don't have to do anything. Just let your hands rest, warm and loose, on the blanket. Soon, we'll explore what happened when the needle was set aside and visitors arrived. The elaborate dance of social calling, the conversations that were allowed and the ones that weren't. But for now, rest in the quiet of handwork, the softness of thread, the patience of the needle. The light is gentle. The room is still. I'm still here. The garden path curves before her, white gravel against green grass. Marie-Anne walks slowly, her companion a step behind. The afternoon is fine, rare for April, the sun warm and the sky blue after days of grey and cold, and she has escaped the house at last. Escaped is the right word, though no one would call it that. She has taken the air. As they say, she has exercised in the manner appropriate to a lady of her station, but it feels like escape. It feels like freedom, or the closest thing to freedom she knows. The stays are still tight against her ribs, constricting her breath. You cannot take a truly deep breath in stays, cannot fill your lungs to capacity. Must learn to breathe shallowly, carefully. The heels of her shoes are not designed for gravel paths. They sink slightly with each step, making her balance precarious. The petticoats catch at her ankles, the wide panniers of her skirt brushing against the hedges when she walks too close. But she is moving. She is outdoors. She is breathing air that does not smell of beeswax and candle smoke and perfume and other people. The garden stretches around her, formal and ordered. This is the French style. Geometry imposed on nature. Every hedge clipped into precise shape. Every path raked clean. Every flower bed arranged in patterns pleasing to the eye. There are no surprises here. She knows every turn, every bench, every bed of roses and tulips, and carefully cultivated blooms. She has walked this circuit 1,000 times since coming to this house as a bride of 16, and yet it is hers, more than any room in the house. Indoors, she is always visible, always potentially observed. The servants watch her, not maliciously, but constantly, because their work requires anticipating her needs, being ready before she asks. Her husband might appear at any moment, might require her presence, her conversation, her attention. Visitors might arrive. Even in her private sitting room, she is never quite alone. There are ears behind doors, eyes at windows. The constant awareness of being seen. But in the garden, there is space, not privacy, exactly. Her companion is there, and gardeners working in the distance, and the house looming at the end of the path. But something like privacy, the wide sky, the rustle of leaves, the sense that for a few moments she might almost be herself. The garden was the closest most women came to outdoor life. Think about what that means. Think about spending your life almost entirely indoors, in rooms, in carriages that were just rooms on wheels, in churches that were just larger rooms with higher ceilings. Think about seeing the sky only through glass, feeling the weather only when forced to move from one building to another. Women walked in gardens because gardens were extensions of domestic space. They were enclosed, controlled, safe within the garden walls. A woman could move without scandal, could breathe without comment. She could even do things that elsewhere would be impossible. Sit on a bench and read, walk arm in arm with a friend, lift her face to the sun without being seen by the general public. But even here, there were rules. A respectable woman did not walk alone. Marie-Anne's companion is there precisely to prove her virtue, a witness that nothing improper could be happening, that she has not sneaked away to meet a lover, that her afternoon walk is exactly what it appears to be. Innocent exercise. Suitable for a lady, a woman could not walk too quickly. Running was unthinkable. The stays would not allow it, the petticoats would not allow it, the shoes would not allow it, but beyond all that, the propriety would not allow it. A woman who ran was a woman out of control. Even a brisk pace might raise eyebrows. The movement had to be graceful, gliding, slow enough to seem effortless. A woman could not walk in all weathers. Rain kept you indoors, obviously. The fabrics of the era would be ruined, and besides, exposing yourself to wet and cold invited illness. Too much sun was also problematic. A tanned complexion was the mark of a labourer, and fair skin had to be protected. Even a fine day might keep you inside if the air was too cold, too warm, too damp, too dry. Marie-Anne has perhaps an hour on this rare fine afternoon. She walks the circuit of the garden, past the rose beds just coming into bud, past the fountain where no water plays. It will be turned on for summer guests, past the small temple at the far end where she sometimes sits in warmer months, past the wall covered with espaliered fruit trees, back toward the house. Her companion walks behind her, silent. The woman is paid to be silent, to be present without being noticed, to serve as witness without being witness. It is a strange job, companion to a lady, something between servant and friend, neither one nor the other, occupying an awkward middle ground. Marie-Anne barely notices her anymore. The companion has been with her for years. Her presence is like the presence of the walls, the trees, the sky, part of the landscape, unremarkable. What is Marie-Anne thinking about as she walks? The same things she always thinks about, probably. The children, the household, the letter she needs to write, the conversation from yesterday that she is still turning over in her mind, the novel she is reading, the way the light looks on the leaves, or perhaps nothing at all. Perhaps the walk itself is enough. The movement, the air, the brief illusion of freedom. Hannah's outdoor world is smaller, simpler. The house in Bristol has a garden. She calls it that, though a Parisian aristocrat would laugh at its modest dimensions. A patch of ground behind the kitchen, no more than 30 feet square. A few beds for vegetables, onions, cabbages, herbs for cooking. A climbing rose against the back wall, planted by the previous tenant, and now sprawling in all directions. A bench, weathered and in need of repair, where she sometimes sits on fine evenings. This afternoon, she is in her garden, kneeling in the dirt, actually a thing Marie-Anne would never do, could never do in her stays and skirts and status. Hannah has changed into an older dress, one she doesn't mind dirtying. She is pulling weeds from between the herb plants, thinning the overcrowded rows, making space for growth. Her hands are in the earth. The dirt is cool and damp. The smell rises to her nose. That particular smell of soil in spring, full of promise, full of life beginning again. She does not have a companion watching her. She does not need one. A merchant's wife has more freedom in some ways than a countess. Lower expectations, less scrutiny, more room to move within a narrower sphere. If her neighbors see her in her garden, they think nothing of it. A woman tending vegetables is a woman being useful, frugal, practical. Nothing scandalous about that. But she cannot walk far, either. Cannot leave the city without occasion, without permission, in some sense, not legal permission, but social. A woman walking alone on country roads would be strange, suspicious, potentially dangerous to her reputation, if not her person. She is as bound as Marianne, just in different ways. Gertrude walks when she can. The town is small enough that a pastor's wife might walk its streets without scandal, especially if she has an errand. Visiting a sick parishioner, carrying food to a poor family, collecting herbs from the meadow outside town, if the season is right and she takes a servant girl along. These walks are her only exercise. The only time she moves more than a few steps in any direction. The only time she feels the air on her face, sees the sky above her, remembers that there is a world beyond the walls of her narrow house. She is old now, in her 50s, which feels old when you have worked hard all your life. Her legs ache. Her breath comes short on the hills, but she walks anyway, when she can, because the walks are precious, because they remind her that she is alive, because for a few minutes she can be not a pastor's wife, not a mother, not a household manager, but just a woman moving through the world. And then there are the women who had no gardens at all. Margot, in Paris, sees the sky only through windows or when crossing the courtyard between buildings. Her work keeps her inside, the endless labour of a servant's life. Dawn to dusk and beyond, in kitchens and pantries and laundries and chambers. When she steps outside, it is to dump slops, to fetch water, to run an errand for the cook. Not leisure, never leisure. Agnes, in her cottage in Nottinghamshire, sees the sky when she walks to the village for supplies, when she hangs her washing on the line, when she stands in her doorway for a breath of air between sessions at the lace pillow. She has no garden, only a small yard of packed earth. The countryside stretches beyond her door, beautiful in ways she no longer notices, inaccessible, except when necessity drives her out. For these women, outdoors meant work, meant cold streets and heavy loads, meant weather you could not escape because there was no warm parlour waiting for you. The privilege of taking the air was exactly that, a privilege. Marianne reaches the far end of the garden and turns. The sun is beginning its descent toward evening, the light thickening, the shadows lengthening across the gravel paths. Soon she will go back inside. Soon the walls will close around her again. But for now, she stands still for a moment, lifts her face to the sky, breathes as deeply as her stays allow. What is she feeling? Relief, perhaps, at being outside. Restlessness, at being still constrained. Longing for something she cannot name. More space, more freedom, more life. Or maybe just this. The simple animal pleasure of warmth on skin, of air in lungs, of body moving through space. The things we share with every creature that walks the earth and forget to notice most of the time. Take a breath of air now. Even if you are inside, even if it is night. Feel your body, feel your breath. Feel the way you can move, whenever you want to, simply by moving. Let your shoulders drop, let your eyes rest. Let the garden fade into softness around the edges. Soon we will go back inside. To the ritual of tea, to the comfort of warm cups and small cakes, and the company of women gathered in the fading light. But for now, rest here. In the quiet garden, in the failing afternoon, in the space between walls, I'm still here. The kettle sings, a high, thin note rising from the hearth. Hannah rises from her chair, moves to the fire, and lifts the kettle carefully with a thick cloth wrapped around the handle. The iron is hot, nearly too hot to touch even through the fabric. She carries it to the table where the teapot waits. A plump brown pot of English stoneware, nothing fancy, but good and solid and hers. She pours the water in a slow stream. Steam rises, fragrant with the leaves already waiting inside. Leaves she measured out carefully, 3 spoonfuls for a pot this size. Leaves that came from China, from the other side of the world, from distances she cannot truly imagine. Tea. It seems like such a simple thing to us now. A bag dropped into a mug, forgotten on the counter while we check our phones. Drunk, lukewarm while doing 3 other things. We think nothing of it. This beverage that is everywhere, that costs nearly nothing, that requires no preparation beyond boiling water. But in the 18th century, tea was different. Tea was ritual. Tea was theatre. Tea was a statement about who you were and what you could afford. The tea itself was expensive, seriously expensive. It came from China, from the mountains of Fujian province, where it was cultivated and processed by methods Europeans did not understand and could not replicate. It was packed into chests, loaded onto ships of the East India Company, carried across oceans that took months to cross, around the Cape of Good Hope, through storms and pirates and scurvy, to arrive at last in London or Amsterdam or Bordeaux. By the time it reached Hannah's tea caddy in Bristol, it had travelled farther than she ever would. Each leaf was a small miracle of global trade, a product of labour and risk and distance almost impossible to grasp, and the price reflected this. A pound of good tea might cost what a working person earned in a week. Even cheaper grades were dear. Tea was a luxury, something you saved for special occasions, something you offered to honoured guests, something you rationed and guarded and treated with respect. Hannah keeps her tea in a locked box. A tea caddy, they call it, a wooden box, sometimes lined with lead or pewter to keep the leaves fresh, with a lock on the front and a key that the mistress keeps. Many people did this. Tea was valuable enough to steal, and servants had been known to pilfer a pinch here and there, either for themselves or to sell on the black market. The lock was both practical and symbolic. This is mine. This is precious. This is not for unauthorized hands. The key hangs from Hannah's waist on a chain, along with the keys to the silver closet and the linen press. These are the keys to domestic power, such as it is. She unlocks the caddy each afternoon, measures out the leaves, relocks it, returns the key to her chain. The ritual is as much about status as security. This is a household that can afford tea. This is a household that is properly managed. This is a respectable home. The teapot sits on the table now, steeping. Hannah has covered it with a padded cover that keeps the heat in, another small mark of domestic competence. While the tea brews, she arranges the cups and saucers. Her china is not fine, not the delicate porcelain that graces aristocratic tables, painted with flowers and gilded with gold, imported from China or produced at great expense by the new European manufactories at Meissen or Sèvres. Her china is English creamware, earthenware glazed to a creamy white, sturdy and sensible, decorated with a simple green edge. But it is hers. She bought it piece by piece over the years, starting with the teapot and adding cups and saucers as she could afford them. The first cup was a wedding present from her mother. The sugar bowl came later, a gift from her husband on her 30th birthday. The cream jug was an extravagance she bought herself, one afternoon when the household accounts showed a surplus, and she decided, just this once, to spend on something beautiful. Each piece is a small victory. Each piece says, we are established here. We are not struggling. We can afford the markers of respectability. The sugar bowl deserves special mention. Sugar was expensive, more expensive even than tea. In some years, it came from the Caribbean, from plantations where enslaved people worked and suffered and died to produce the white crystals that sweetened Europe's cups. This was known in the way that uncomfortable truths are known. Mentioned sometimes, thought about rarely, allowed to sit at the edge of consciousness, where it need not disturb daily life. By the 1,790 seconds, there would be boycotts. Women refusing to buy sugar produced by enslaved labor, publishing pamphlets, organizing campaigns, trying to make the connection between their tea tables and the suffering that filled them. The abstention movement would spread through England and beyond, one of the first consumer boycotts in history. But in the 1,770 seconds, Hannah stirs sugar into her tea without thinking about where it came from. The moral awakening has not yet arrived. The sweetness is simply sweetness, a pleasure she has earned, a comfort on a cold afternoon. I want to name this, to acknowledge it. The quiet afternoons we are visiting were not innocent. They were embedded in systems of suffering that stretched around the globe: the slave trade, colonial exploitation, the crushing labor of the poor at home, the tea and sugar and chocolate, the silk and cotton and lace, the comfort and leisure of some women made possible by the labor and pain of others. We can hold both truths at once. We must hold them. The beauty of the ritual and the darkness behind it. The comfort of the cup and the history that fills it. This is how the past is. Always. Complicated, contradicted, human. But tonight is not for reckoning. Tonight is for rest. Hannah pours the tea. This is the moment. The ritual reaches its center. The mistress of the house pours. Always. This is not work to be delegated to a servant. The pouring is a privilege and a duty, a mark of status and a gesture of care. She lifts the pot with both hands, tilts it carefully, watches the amber liquid stream into the first cup. The steam rises. The fragrance fills the room. That distinctive scent of tea, dark and bright at the same time, both bitter and sweet. Her daughter Elizabeth takes the first cup, receives it with a murmured thanks, adds milk and sugar to taste. Her younger daughter Martha receives the second. Hannah pours her own cup last, the last to be served, as hostess always is. They are alone this afternoon. No guests, no callers, no obligation to perform. Just the three of them around the small table, the tea warming their hands, the late afternoon light falling soft through the window. "Mother," Martha says, "may I have another biscuit?" "You may." Such small moments, such ordinary exchanges. They feel like nothing when they're happening. But they are everything, really. The texture of life, the way days actually feel when you're living them. In Paris, Marie-Anne's afternoon refreshments are more elaborate. Tea is available, certainly. It has been fashionable in France for decades. But chocolate is equally popular, perhaps more so. Hot chocolate in the Spanish style, thick and rich and served in special cups that keep it warm. Marie-Anne has a chocolate service that she uses for intimate gatherings. A chocolate pot of silver with a hole in the lid for the molinillo, a wooden whisk used to froth the drink. Special cups, taller and narrower than teacups, designed to keep the chocolate hot from first sip to last. A pot for hot water, to thin the chocolate if desired. A small dish for the sugar that sweetens it. The chocolate itself is a confection of ground cacao. Sugar, spices, sometimes vanilla, sometimes cinnamon, sometimes a hint of chili in the old Aztec style. It is prepared with care, whisked to a foam, poured into the waiting cups. When Marie-Anne serves chocolate, it is for someone special. Her closest friend, her sister, when she visits. An intimate connection that has earned this small extravagance. This afternoon, she is alone. No chocolate service today, no company to receive it. Just her own cup of tea, drunk in the quiet of her sitting room, watching the light change across the garden outside. In Saxony, Gertrude's afternoons center on coffee. Coffee has a different character than tea or chocolate. It is stimulating where they are soothing, brisk where they are gentle. The Germans embraced coffee early and thoroughly, and by the late 18th century, the afternoon coffee circle was a central institution of female social life. Gertrude's circle meets on Wednesdays. 6 or 7 neighbor women gather in her parlor, each bringing a small contribution, a cake, a plate of biscuits, a jar of preserves. The coffee is strong and black, brewed in a tall pot and served in cups without handles. Sugar is available, cream if you prefer. The women talk. They talk about everything and nothing. The price of wool, the health of children and grandchildren, the sermon from last Sunday, the scandalous behavior of a woman 2 villages over who has been seen walking with a man not her husband. The talk is comfortable, familiar, the same topics circled through year after year. Their hands are busy while they talk. Mending, usually, the endless mending that a household requires. Or knitting, stockings for husbands and children, the needles clicking in rhythm with the conversation. This is what tea time meant, though they drank coffee instead of tea. The beverage was almost secondary to the gathering itself, the excuse to come together, the permission to sit, the ritual that said, "For this hour, we are not servants of our households. We are women together, taking a breath, sharing what comfort we can give and receive. Take a breath now. Feel the warmth of your blanket, like the warmth of a cup between your hands. Imagine the taste of something warm and good. Tea, coffee, chocolate, whatever sounds best to you. The way it spreads through you when you drink it. The way it tells your body, you are safe, you are cared for, you are home. Let your jaw soften. Let your eyes rest. Soon we'll move on. To the women who had no afternoons at all, whose time was not their own, whose labor made the leisure of others possible, we will honor them too. But for now, stay here, in the warmth, in the ritual, in the small ceremony of care. I'm still here. There is no quiet in Margot's afternoon. She is carrying coals up 3 flights of stairs. The bucket is heavy, 15 pounds, 20 pounds, and the coal dust is already on her hands. Her apron, probably her face, though she can't see it. The back stairs are narrow and dark, designed for servants to move through the house without being seen, and she knows every step by feel because there is never enough light to see properly. At the top, she will fill the bedroom fireplaces, the Comtesse's room first, then the young ladies', then the guest chambers that might be needed if company comes unexpectedly. Then back down for more coals. Then the dusting. Then helping to lay the table for dinner. Then clearing after dinner. Then turning down the beds. Then, finally, stumbling up to her own bed in the attic, where she will sleep for 6 hours before rising to do it all again. This is not unusual. This is not complaint. This is simply what life is. When you are a servant in a great house, in the 1,760 seconds. Margot is 24 years old. She came to Marianne's household at 14, from a village in Normandy she has not returned to in 10 years. Her family is there still, her mother, her father if he's still living, she hasn't heard in years. Younger siblings, she barely remembers. She sends money when she can. A few coins from her annual wage, though she knows it's not enough. Will never be enough. She works from before dawn until after dark. In summer, the days are longer, which means more working hours. In winter, the days are shorter, but the fires need more tending. The cold makes everything harder, and it balances out somehow. She sleeps in a narrow bed in the attic, sharing the room with 2 other maids. 3 beds pushed close together, barely room to stand between them. She has 1 half-day off per fortnight. Every other Sunday afternoon, from after the midday meal until before the evening service, she is free to do as she pleases. Sometimes she walks to the river and sits on the bank, watching the boats pass, thinking about nothing and everything. Sometimes she meets Claude, the footman, the young man from Normandy with kind eyes who has been courting her in the tentative, careful way of servants who know their positions depend on good behaviour. That is her leisure. That is her afternoon. A few hours every 2 weeks, snatched from the endless round of work. We have been speaking of women with time. Women who could afford to read, to embroider, to call on friends, to tend their gardens, to drink tea from porcelain cups. But for the vast majority of European women in the 18th century, no such afternoons existed. The quiet hours were for the served, not the serving, and the serving were many. In a household like Marie Anne's, there might be a dozen servants or more. At the top, the butler and the housekeeper, senior staff, trusted employees, wielding authority over those below them. Beneath them, a hierarchy as strict as any aristocracy. The cook, queen of her kitchen, the lady's maid, closest to the mistress, privy to secrets and vulnerabilities, the valets and footmen who attended the men, the housemaids who cleaned and carried, the scullery maid at the bottom, washing pots in cold water until her hands cracked and bled. They rose early, 4 or 5 in the morning, often earlier. The fires had to be lit before the family woke, the rooms warmed, the water heated, breakfast had to be prepared, laid out, served. The chambers had to be cleaned, while the family was occupied elsewhere. Beds made, chamber pots emptied, floors swept, furniture dusted. The endless cycle of meals had to be cooked, served, cleared, the dishes washed and stored. There was no afternoon for them, no pause. The work flowed continuously from dawn until night, one task bleeding into the next. The house's needs never satisfied for more than a few hours at a time. And yet even servants had their moments. Margot sits now on the back stairs. Just for a minute. She has learned to steal these moments, the pauses between tasks when no one is watching, when she can rest her aching legs and catch her breath before the next duty calls. She hears, distantly, the murmur of voices from the salon above. The mistress has visitors. There will be tea to bring up, cakes to arrange on plates, cups to wash when the guests leave. But not yet. For now, she sits. What does she think about? Sitting here in the dark stairwell. She thinks about Claude, about whether he means what he says, about whether they might marry someday, about what kind of life they could have together. 2 servants married can sometimes stay in the same household. The butler and housekeeper often are man and wife, but sometimes they must separate, finding positions where they can. There are no guarantees. She thinks about her mother, about whether the money arrived safely, about whether it helped, about the guilt of being so far away while her family struggles. She thinks about nothing, about the darkness and the silence and the strange peace of sitting still. Even for a moment, the body rests, the mind empties, and then, too soon, she hears footsteps above. The visitors are leaving. Time to move. Agnes has no master and mistress. She is her own employer, in a sense. But that means only that the work is hers, the risk is hers, and there is no one to blame but herself if she cannot make ends meet. She sits by the window in her cottage near Nottingham. It is a small cottage, 1 room downstairs and a loft above for sleeping, thatched roof, walls that let in the cold despite her best efforts. But it is hers, or at least she pays the rent, and there is a kind of freedom in that. Her lace pillow is in her lap. The pillow is not soft. It is a hard cushion, stuffed firm to hold the pins that mark her pattern. On the pillow, dozens of bobbins hang, each wound with thread, each waiting to be twisted and crossed in the complex dance that makes lace. She has been making lace for 20 years. She learned as a girl, sitting beside her mother, watching the patterns emerge from thread and air. Her mother learned from her mother. The skill passes down through generations, a heritage more valuable than money or land. The lace she makes is good, very good. Her patterns are intricate and even, her technique impeccable, her production steady and reliable. Middlemen come to her door to buy what she produces, taking it to merchants in Nottingham and London who will sell it to ladies who wear it on their caps and collars and cuffs. But the price they pay is low, always lower than it should be. They know she has no choice, no other skill, no other income, no way to sell directly to the ladies who might pay more. She takes what they offer, or she starves. And her eyes are not what they once were. 20 years of close work, 20 years of squinting at fine thread in poor light. The damage accumulates, slowly at first, and then faster. She holds the pillow closer now than she used to. Some days the threads blur and swim, no matter how much she blinks. Some days the headaches come, pounding behind her eyes, and she has to stop. Though stopping means falling behind, means less money, means risk. She knows what is coming. In a few years, maybe sooner, her eyes will fail completely. She will not be able to work. And then, what? The parish poorhouse? Begging? Death in a ditch? She tries not to think about it. But it is there, at the edge of her mind, always. Her quiet afternoon is this: work. Hours of it. The click of the bobbins, the slow emergence of the pattern, the ache in her shoulders and her neck and her fingers. No tea, no visitors, no garden walks, just this. Work until the light fails, then work by candlelight as long as the candle lasts, then sleep, then wake, then work again. I want to hold this alongside the other afternoons. Not to cast judgment, not to say Marie-Anne is wrong for her leisure, or Hannah is wrong for her tea, or Gertrude is wrong for her coffee circle. They did not create this system. They were born into it, as we are all born into systems we did not choose. But I want to name what is true. The quiet afternoons of some were made possible by the labour of others. Marie-Anne could read novels because Margot carried coals. Hannah could sew by the window because someone else was cooking her dinner, washing her clothes, cleaning her house. The leisure of the few rested on the backs of the many. This is still true, of course. The quiet we enjoy is still built on work we do not see. The clothes we wear, the food we eat, the devices we hold, they come to us through chains of labour, mostly invisible, mostly unacknowledged, stretching around the world. It is uncomfortable to think about. But it is true, and truth is what we owe the past, even in a story meant to help you sleep. But there is something else to say about Margot and Agnes. Something the simple story of labour and exploitation misses. They were not only suffering, they were not only victims. Margot has jokes she tells with the other maids. Late at night in the attic, muffled laughter that must not carry downstairs. She has Claude, and the warmth that rises in her chest when she sees him. She has her pride, the work done well, the approval of the housekeeper, the knowledge that she is competent, valued, needed. Agnes has the beauty that emerges under her hands, the lace that grows from thread and air into something intricate and lovely. When she finishes a piece, lifts it from the pillow, holds it up to the light, sees the pattern complete, there is satisfaction, there is joy, even the joy of making, the joy of skill exercised, craft perfected, art created with only the simplest materials. They had moments of rest stolen from the day, moments of connection with others like them, moments of beauty even in the midst of labour. They were not lesser beings. They were not background figures in other people's stories. They were themselves, complete, as real as any countess in any parlour. Take a breath now, slow and gentle. Feel the weight of your body, the gift of rest, the fact that right now, in this moment, no one is asking anything of you, no work to do, no tasks to complete, just breath and quiet and the dark. Thank you to all the women who worked so that others could rest. Thank you to all the women who rested and dreamed and made something beautiful of the time they were given. Thank you to all of them. The light is fading. The afternoon is ending, but we are not done. Soon we will explore the inner lives of these women, the thoughts and dreams and private rebellions that no one else could see. But for now, rest. Just rest. I'm still here. What were they thinking about? All these women, in their parlours and kitchens and gardens and garrets, all these hours, filled with reading and sewing and visiting and tea and work, all this time, stretching across a century, across a continent, across millions of lives we will never know. What was going on inside? We cannot know for certain. The inside of another person's mind is the most inaccessible place in the universe, and the inside of a mind from 3 centuries ago is more inaccessible still. We have letters and diaries, but these are filtered, written with awareness that someone might read them, tailored to an imagined audience even when they claim to be private. The most intimate thoughts, the ones that would shock or embarrass, were rarely committed to paper. And even those who wrote honestly could not write everything. Language fails. Consciousness overflows its containers, but we can piece things together. We can read between the lines. We can imagine, based on what we know of human nature, which changes far less than fashion or technology, what it might have felt like to be a woman in 1760, 1770, 1780. To live in a body not entirely your own. To have a mind full of thoughts you could not speak aloud. Marie-Anne keeps her diary. Each evening, in her private sitting room, after the household has retired and the servants have been dismissed, she sits at her desk and writes. The habit began in girlhood. The nuns at the convent taught the practice of examining one's conscience, but it has evolved into something else over the years. Something less religious, more personal. A record of her life. For herself. For no one else. Some entries are bare facts. Received Madame Fournier and her daughter-in-law. Walked in the garden, weather fine. The Comte dined out. I took supper in my room, but some entries go deeper. I am 35 years old. I have been a wife for 19 years, a mother for 17. I have done everything that was expected of me. I married the man my father chose. I bore children, 4 who lived, 2 who did not. I managed the household, received the guests, performed the endless duties that fill a woman's days, and I find myself asking, is this all? Is this what life is? Have I lived, truly lived, or only existed? I look at the comp sometimes, across the dinner table or the drawing room, and I think, who are you? After 19 years of marriage, I barely know him. I know his habits, what he likes to eat, how he takes his coffee, the hour he retires. But him, the inside of him, the thoughts he thinks, the fears he carries, I have no idea. And I wonder if he knows me either. If anyone does, she does not show this diary to anyone. Her husband would be bewildered. Probably. What does she mean? Is this all? Does she not have everything a woman could want? Her friends might be shocked. Or worse, might sympathize too deeply. Might reveal similar feelings they had all been hiding from each other. The diary is for herself alone, a space where she can be honest. What did she think about in the quiet afternoons when her hands were busy with embroidery and her mind was free to wander? She thought about her children. Her son at school, struggling with Latin, probably getting into the kind of trouble that boys get into, far from her ability to help or guide. Her elder daughter, 19 now, not yet married, a worry, always a worry, each year that passes making her less desirable. Her younger daughter, 17, beautiful but melancholy, prone to silences and sudden tears that Marie-Anne cannot understand or cure. She thought about the past, her childhood, which seemed from this distance like a golden age, freedom, or what felt like freedom, parents who loved her, summers at the country house with cousins and games, and the world stretching endless before her. She thought about the girl she was before marriage, before children, before the endless repetition of identical days. Where did that girl go? Was she still in there somewhere? Or had she been worn away, like a stone smoothed by water, until nothing distinctive remained? She thought about God. She had been raised to believe in heaven and hell, in sin and salvation, in a God who watched and judged and loved in mysterious ways. She had believed, as a child, as a young woman, but somewhere along the way, the belief had faded. Not dramatically, not through crisis or revelation, just gradually, like a colour bleaching in sunlight. Now, when she prayed, she was not sure anyone was listening. When she confessed, she was not sure it mattered. She went through the motions. Everyone went through the motions. But the substance was gone. This doubt she could not speak aloud. It was one thing to hide novels in false covers. It was another to question God. The consequences could be severe, not just social disgrace, but real danger. The church still had power. Better to keep these thoughts to herself, and she thought about nothing. This was perhaps the most common occupation of her mind, a kind of pleasant emptiness, a drifting, a rest from thinking. The afternoon light on the garden, the rhythm of the needle through fabric, the sound of birds outside the window, time passing without content, without agenda, without purpose. It felt like waste. Sometimes it felt like peace. Other times it was what her life had become. Hannah's inner life was different, shaped by different circumstances. She was not raised to leisure. Her childhood had included work, real work, helping her mother, learning the skills that would make her a competent wife and household manager. Her education had been practical. Reading, writing, arithmetic, sewing, cooking. She had been taught to be useful, and usefulness was her identity as much as duty was Marie-Anne's. But beneath the practicality, there was a rich inner landscape. She thought about her sister Sarah constantly. The bond between them was the strongest she knew, stronger than the bond with her husband, though she would never say that aloud, would barely admit it to herself. When something happened, anything, good or bad or simply interesting, her first thought was, I must write to Sarah about this. Sarah was her witness, the person who made her life real by knowing it. She thought about her children with a love that sometimes frightened her with its intensity. If anything happened to them, she could not think about it, and yet she thought about it constantly. The fever that might sweep through the town, the accidents that befell children, the tiny coffins she had seen carried to the churchyard, knowing the parents walking behind. She had lost children herself, 2 babies who did not survive their first year, whose faces she could still see when she closed her eyes, whose absence was a wound that had never quite healed. She thought about London, about the life she had left when she married and moved to Bristol, the streets she knew by heart, the church where she was christened, the smell of the Thames on summer evenings. She had been happy to leave, at the time, excited about marriage, eager for the new life that awaited her. But now, 17 years later, she felt the loss acutely. Bristol was home, but it was not home. London was not home anymore either. She was unmoored, belonging fully to neither place, and she thought about herself in ways that would have surprised those who knew her. She wondered if she had made the right choices. She wondered what her life would have been if she had married someone else, or not married at all. She wondered if she was a good person, really good, not just appearing good, and what would happen to her when she died. She wondered if the restlessness she felt was normal, or if it was a sign of something wrong with her, some deficiency of character that a better woman would not have. These thoughts were dangerous. They led nowhere good. Better to push them aside, to pick up her sewing, to write to Sarah, to busy herself with the tasks that kept such thoughts at bay. But they were there. They were always there. Gertrude's inner life was shaped by faith in a way that Marie-Anne's and Hannah's were not. She believed, not perfectly. Doubt crept in, especially in the dark hours of the night, especially when the world seemed cruel and God seemed absent. But she believed. The faith she had been raised in was not a social convention or a cultural habit. It was the center of her life, the framework through which she understood everything. Each afternoon, she prayed. Not the formal prayers of church, those she knew by heart and could recite without thinking, but real prayer. The conversation with God that the pietist tradition taught her was possible and necessary. She knelt by her bed or sat in the chair by the window, and she talked to God about her life. She confessed her sins, the anger she felt at her husband's absences, the envy of women who had more, the pride she took in her daughter's accomplishments. She asked for guidance, with the household, with the parishioners she visited, with the challenges that each day brought. She gave thanks for health, for family, for the food on the table and the roof over her head. And she listened. This was the part that outsiders might not understand. She listened for God's voice, not an audible voice. She was not mad, but a sense of presence, of direction, of being heard. Sometimes it came, sometimes it did not, but the practice itself was sustaining. Whether or not she felt God's presence in any given moment, her inner life was also filled with memory. The children she had raised, the difficult births, the sleepless nights, the joy of watching them grow, the husband she had loved for 40 years, his kindness, his faith, his infuriating habits, his hands on hers when they prayed together in the evenings, the life she had built in this small town, knowing everyone, being known by everyone, the web of relationships that held her in place. She thought about death, increasingly, not with fear. Her faith promised something beyond, but with curiosity. What would it be like? Would she see her parents again, her friends who had gone before, the babies she had lost? Would there be rest? Finally, the rest that this life never quite provided. She thought about her legacy, not in grand terms. She would not be remembered by history. She knew that, had no desire for it. But by her children, her grandchildren. Would they remember her prayers, her teachings, the faith she had tried to pass on? Would it survive into the next generation, or would the new ideas sweeping through Europe wash it all away? And the women who left no diaries, who could not write, or had no one to write to, whose inner lives disappeared entirely when they died. We cannot know what Margot thought as she carried her buckets up the stairs, but we can imagine. We can extend to her the same rich interiority we recognize in ourselves. She thought about Claude, about his smile, his voice, the way he looked at her. She thought about whether he would propose and what she would say if he did, and whether they could make a life together. She thought about the babies they might have someday, and where they would live, and whether life might become easier, eventually, somehow. She thought about home, the village she had left at 14, the mother she might never see again, the guilt and the longing and the knowledge that she could not go back, that the door had closed behind her when she left. She thought about the mistress, about Marie-Anne, whom she saw every day and did not know at all. She wondered what it was like to live that way, to have beautiful clothes and leisure hours and no calluses on your hands, She wondered if the mistress was happy. She wondered if anyone was happy. Agnes, at her lace pillow, thought about survival, about the money she needed and how to get it, about the eyes that were failing and what would happen when they failed entirely, about whether she should try to find a husband, unlikely at her age, or train an apprentice who would pay her, or simply work until she could not work anymore, and then, but she also thought about beauty, about the patterns that emerged from thread and air, about the satisfaction of work well done, about the strange fact that she, a poor woman in a cottage, could create something that would adorn a duchess or a queen, could transform raw materials into art. She thought about the world beyond her village. She had never travelled more than 20 miles in any direction, but she knew the world was vast. She had heard stories of London, of Paris, of places across the ocean where people lived entirely different lives. She wondered what it would be like to see these places. She knew she never would. The inner life does not belong only to those who record it. Everyone who has ever lived has had thoughts, dreams, fears, hopes, has loved someone, has lost something, has wondered, in quiet moments, what it all means and whether it matters. We are connected to these women across the centuries, not because we know their stories. We know only fragments, guesses, imaginings, but because we share with them the fundamental fact of consciousness. We too have inner lives that no one else can fully see. We too carry private thoughts through public days. We too wonder, sometimes, if this is all there is. Take a breath now. Let it be slow and deep. Feel your own inner life. The thoughts drifting through you like clouds. The feelings you carry, named and unnamed. The person you are when no one is watching. This too is real. This too matters. This too will be lost someday, as theirs was lost. And that is all right. That is how it has always been. The loss does not diminish the reality of what was lived. Let your eyes close. Let your body be heavy. Soon we will explore the physical world of these women. The rooms, the furniture, the objects that surrounded them. But for now, rest here, in the quiet of your own mind, in the company of all the inner lives that ever existed. I'm still here. The room holds the afternoon light. Marie Anne's private sitting room is not large. 8 paces by 10, perhaps. She has counted them in idle moments, walking the perimeter like a caged bird. But the room is hers, more than any other space in the house. She chose the wallpaper, pale blue, with a delicate pattern of silver vines that catch the light. She chose the chairs, the writing desk, the chaise by the window where she reads. She decided where each piece would go, rearranging until the room felt right. The wallpaper came from a workshop in Paris. Fashionable and expensive, hand-printed in a pattern that no other house in the city has. It was a small extravagance, one of the few she allowed herself when they redecorated 5 years ago. Her husband had been skeptical. Why not simple paint? Why not something more practical? But she had insisted, and he had given way, as he usually did in matters of domestic decoration. This was her realm. Here, at least, her choices prevailed. The desk is called a bonheur du jour, a happiness of the day. A perfect name, she thinks, for a piece of furniture designed to hold small daily pleasures. It is small and elegant, made of rosewood inlaid with patterns in lighter wood, flowers and ribbons and curling leaves. The surface folds down to become a writing table. Inside are cubbyholes for paper, ink, sealing wax, the small tools of correspondence. There is a secret drawer. She discovered it months after buying the desk, pushed a hidden catch, and watched the compartment spring open. She keeps her diary there now, safe from curious eyes. The chaise by the window is upholstered in silk that matches the wallpaper, the same pale blue. It is not comfortable, exactly, Nothing in a woman's life is designed for comfort, she has sometimes thought, but it is beautiful, and she has spent countless hours lying there, reading, or simply watching the light change across the garden below. A clock ticks on the mantelpiece. It is gilded bronze, ornate, topped with a figure of a shepherdess in improbable finery. The clock was a gift from her husband on their 10th anniversary. She does not much like it. The design is fussy, the shepherdess ridiculous. But she keeps it here because it keeps good time, because it fills the silence with its small, reliable sounds, because she has grown used to its presence after so many years. Beside the clock, a pair of candlesticks in silver. They are lit only in the evening, when the daylight fades, and she cannot read or sew by natural light alone. Candles are expensive, good beeswax candles that burn clean and bright, and she uses them sparingly. During the afternoon hours, the room depends on the window. This is why the chaise is placed where it is. This is why women fought for window seats in any room where they might spend time. Light was precious. Light determined what you could do with your time. The smell of the room is familiar to her. Beeswax from the polished furniture, dried lavender in a bowl on the side table, the faint residue of her morning chocolate, the distant hint of smoke from the fireplace that was lit against the April chill. Each room has its own smell, she has noticed. The salon smells of the dozens of perfumes that have wafted through it, layers upon layers accumulated over years. The bedroom smells of sleep and intimacy, and the close warmth of bodies. The dining room smells of food. Always, no matter how well it is aired. But this room smells like her. Hannah's parlour is smaller, simpler. The best chair is her husband's, larger, closer to the fire, positioned for a man returning from work who wants to warm himself and rest. But she has her own corner, near the window, where her workbox sits on a small table she bought the year they married. The table is nothing special. Plain oak, functional, but she has polished it so often over 17 years that the wood gleams now with its own deep light. The clock on the mantel was a wedding present from her parents, the most expensive gift they gave her when she left their home. It is not as fine as Marie-Anne's clock, no gilded shepherdess here, just a simple case of dark wood with a brass face, but it is her most treasured possession. When she winds it each morning, turning the key with careful fingers, she thinks of her mother, who wound it for the first weeks after the wedding, teaching Hannah the proper amount of tension. Her mother has been dead 15 years now. The teacups are displayed in a small cabinet against the wall, not in use now. They are brought out only when there are guests. But visible, proof of respectability. The pewter candlesticks on the mantel are polished every week, whether they need it or not. The curtains are blue chintz, faded now by years of sunlight, but still pretty in Hannah's eyes. The rug is worn in the places where feet have passed 1,000 times, from door to fire, from fire to window, from window to door. But she cannot afford to replace it, so she ignores the worn spots and focuses on the pattern that still shows. Roses and leaves in faded reds and greens. Every object in this room has a history. Every arrangement speaks to who she is, what she values, what she has been able to afford, what she hopes others will see when they enter. The physical world of the 18th century was different from ours in ways we hardly notice until we think about them carefully. There was no electricity. Let that sink in for a moment. No light switches on the wall. No lamps you could turn on and off. Light came from 3 sources. The sun, which was free but unreliable. Candles, which were expensive and dim. And fires, which gave some light but primarily warmth. When the sun set, the house grew dark. When clouds covered the sky, the rooms grew dim even at midday. The rhythm of life followed the rhythm of light. You rose with the sun, worked while it shone. retired when darkness made work impossible. Candles helped, but only somewhat. A single candle gives about 12 lumens of light, roughly 1/100th of what a modern 100-watt bulb produces. You could read by candlelight, but it was difficult, straining. You could sew by candlelight, but only the coarser work. Fine embroidery required daylight. Multiple candles improved things, but multiplied the expense. A household like Marie Anne's might burn through dozens of candles in an evening. A household like Hannah's rationed them carefully, one candle at a time. And so the afternoon was precious for its light. The hours when the sun was high enough to fill rooms with brightness were the hours when close work could be done, reading, writing, sewing. Women positioned themselves near windows, not by accident, but by necessity. The window seat was the seat of privilege, the place where you could see what you were doing. There was no central heating. Warmth came from fireplaces, and fireplaces heated only the immediate vicinity. You could be comfortable by the fire and freezing 6 feet away. You learned to position furniture around the hearth, to cluster activities in the warmest zone. In winter, even grand houses were cold. Cold in the corridors, cold in the bedrooms, cold everywhere the fire did not reach. You wore layers even indoors. You carried hand warmers, small metal containers filled with hot coals. You accepted cold as a companion to daily life. There was no running water. Nothing flowed from a tap. Everything had to be fetched, carried up from the well or the pump in the courtyard, heated over the fire if you wanted it hot, carried again to wherever it was needed. The bathroom as we know it did not exist. Chamber pots were used at night, close stools, simple wooden seats over a pot for longer sessions. Servants carried these away, emptied them, cleaned them. The constant business of water, fetching, heating, using, disposing, structured the day in ways we have entirely forgotten. And yet, within these constraints, women made homes. They created beauty, comfort, meaning. They arranged their chairs just so. They chose their fabrics with care. They made spaces that felt like theirs. The afternoon light falls across Marie Anne's sitting room, a long golden rectangle moving slowly across the floor as the hours pass. The clock ticks. The fire crackles softly in the grate, just enough fire to take the chill off the spring air. The silence is not quite silent. There are sounds from the garden, birds and wind and distant gardeners, sounds from the house, servants moving, doors opening and closing somewhere far away. This is her space, the space where she reads, where she writes, where she thinks her private thoughts. For these few hours, it is hers. Take a breath. Feel the room you are in, wherever you are, the temperature of the air, the texture of the surface beneath you, the sounds, distant traffic, perhaps, or silence, or the hum of electronics we no longer notice because they are always there, the smell of your own space, familiar as your own breath. This too is a room that holds your life, or that someone has made for you, arranged for your comfort. Either way, it holds you now. Let your body be heavy in the bed. Let the room hold you. Soon we will think about change, about how these quiet afternoons evolved, about what was lost when the century ended, about the revolution that swept this world away. But for now, rest here. In a room, in any room, in the safety of walls and a roof and your own small corner of the world. I'm still here. Everything changed. Marie Anne is 62 years old. The year is 1792. The month is August, and the world she knew, the world of quiet afternoons and afternoon visitors, of embroidery and novels and tea, has ended. She sits in her sitting room. The same pale blue wallpaper, though it looks different now. Faded, perhaps, or maybe just changed by the way everything is changed when looked at through exhausted eyes. The same clock ticks on the mantel, the same chaise waits by the window. But everything is different. The servants are gone, most of them. Some fled in the early days, when the violence began, and it became clear that working for an aristocratic family might become dangerous. Some were let go when the money ran out. The revenues from the estate in Burgundy have stopped coming, seized or lost or simply impossible to collect in the chaos. Margot left years ago, married her Norman footman, and moved to the countryside. Marie-Anne hopes they are safe. She hopes without any way of knowing. There is a skeleton staff now, an elderly cook who refused to leave, a single maid who stayed out of loyalty or inability to find another position. Marie-Anne is not sure which, has never asked. They do what they can. The house is not properly maintained anymore. Dust gathers in corners, silver tarnishes. Fires are lit only in rooms that are being used. The salon has not been opened in months. There is no one to receive. The women who used to call have scattered, some to the provinces, seeking safety and distance from Paris. Some abroad, fleeing France entirely for England or Austria, or anywhere that would have them. Some have been arrested. One of them, Marie-Anne cannot think about this directly, approaches it sideways, glancingly, was executed last month. A woman she had known for 30 years, a woman she had shared tea and gossip with, had laughed with, had confided in, gone. A death she cannot imagine, though she tries not to imagine it, though the images come anyway in the night. Her husband died 2 years ago, just before the revolution truly took hold. He had been ill for some time, his heart, the doctors said, weakened by years of rich food and insufficient exercise. He died in his bed, peacefully, holding her hand. She mourned him, though she had never loved him the way novels had taught her love should feel. She mourns him still, though less sharply now. Sometimes she thinks his death was a mercy. He would not have understood what came after. He had been a man of the old regime in every fibre of his being, born to privilege, raised in privilege, never questioning that the world should be arranged for his comfort. The new ideas would have bewildered him. The violence would have terrified him. Better, perhaps, that he went to his grave believing the world would remain as he had always known it. Her children are scattered. Her son is in exile in Austria, part of the émigré community that has formed around the exiled princes, dreaming of restoration, waiting for the madness to end. She has not seen him in 2 years. Letters are difficult. They must go through intermediaries, must be cautious in their content, may not arrive at all. Her daughters are closer but no less lost to her. The elder married and moved to Brittany, where her husband's family has an estate. They are lying low, avoiding attention, hoping to survive. The younger is here in Paris still, married to a man who has somehow made himself useful to the new regime, who wears the tricolour cockade and mouths the new slogans, and keeps his wife safe through compromise. Marie-Anne does not know if she can forgive this younger daughter's husband, does not know if she should try. Survival requires choices she was never taught to make. The afternoon is quiet, truly quiet now, in a way it never was before. No visitors, no callers, no social rounds to make, no obligations to fulfill. She could read all day if she wanted. No husband to disapprove of novels, no household requiring supervision, but she finds she cannot concentrate. The words swim on the page. The stories feel trivial. What is a love story against what is happening in the streets? She sits by the window and watches the light change. The garden below is overgrown. No gardeners now, no one to clip the hedges and rake the paths. It has a wild beauty that she finds. To her surprise, she does not mind. Nature reclaiming what was always hers. She thinks about the past more than the future. What is there to think about? In the future, it is fog, opacity, the unknown. But the past is clear and vivid and solid. She can close her eyes and be 20 again, newly married, walking in the gardens of her husband's estate with her whole life before her. She can be 35, receiving guests in this very room, laughing at a joke, feeling at the center of a world that seemed permanent. She can be any age except the one she is. An old woman in a collapsing world, waiting to see what happens next. Across the channel, Hannah has been dead for 3 years. The flux took her, suddenly, in the autumn of 1789. She felt unwell one morning, a cramping in her stomach, a fever that came on suddenly. By evening, she was worse. By the next day, delirious. The doctor came, bled her, gave her medicines that did nothing. Within a week, she was gone. Her daughters were with her at the end. Her husband held her hand. Sarah arrived from London too late. The letter had taken 3 days, and by the time she reached Bristol, Hannah was already in the ground. The churchyard where they buried her was the same one she had walked past every Sunday for 17 years, never thinking that one day it would hold her. She was 43 years old. Her letters survived. Sarah kept them, could not bring herself to burn them, despite their agreement, despite the private things they contained. She tied them with a ribbon and put them in a box and kept them until her own death, when they passed to her daughter, then her granddaughter, then were lost somewhere in the shuffling of generations. But for a while, Hannah's voice persisted. Her words, her quiet afternoons preserved in ink. She never knew about the revolution in France. She never saw the changes that would come to her own country. The wars, the upheavals, the slow transformation of everything she had known. She died in the old world, the world where afternoons still had their shape, where tea was still served at 4, where women still sewed by windows and wrote letters to their sisters and hoped, quietly, for something they could not name. Perhaps that was a mercy too. Gertrude outlived them both. She is 74 years old now, in the year 1798. Her husband has been dead for 12 years. She lives in the same parsonage. The new pastor, a young man with modern ideas, has allowed her to stay in the small rooms at the back of the house. A kindness. She is grateful for it. Her days are quiet, quieter than they have ever been. She rises late now. Her body insists on rest, and there is no one to scold her for laziness. She takes her breakfast alone, bread, coffee, whatever the maid has prepared. The maid is young, the daughter of a parishioner, working for room and board while she waits for a husband. She is kind to Gertrude, patient with her slowness, gentle when she repeats herself. The afternoons stretch long. Gertrude can no longer sew. Her eyes have failed too far, the fine work impossible now. She cannot read either, except with a magnifying glass that tires her quickly. She sits by the window and looks out at the street she has known for 50 years, watching the people pass, recognizing fewer of them each year. Her children visit when they can. Her daughters come from their own homes, their own busy lives, bringing grandchildren who are polite but restless, eager to leave the dim room with the old woman who smells of lavender and age. Her son, the pastor in a neighboring town, writes letters that his wife reads aloud to her. He is doing well, his children are healthy, the news is always the same, and she is grateful for its sameness. She prays still. This has not left her, even as everything else has faded. Each afternoon, in the quiet hour that used to be filled with coffee circles and mending, she closes her eyes and speaks to God. The words come easily after 70 years of practice. She confesses less now. What sins can an old woman commit? And thanks more. Thanks for the life she has lived. Thanks for the children who survived. Thanks for the faith that has held her, even in the dark times, even when doubt crept close. She thinks about death often, not with fear. Her faith promises something beyond, and she trusts that promise as she has trusted it all her life. But with curiosity, with a kind of eagerness. Even, she is tired. Her body is tired. The world has grown strange around her, full of new ideas and new dangers and changes she does not understand. She is ready to rest, but not yet. Each morning she wakes, and there is another day, and she lives it as best she can. The afternoon light falls through her window. The street outside is quiet. Somewhere, a church bell rings. Not her husband's church, not anymore. But the same bells, the same sound she has heard for half a century. She closes her eyes. She prays. She waits. And what of Margot? What of Agnes? Margot survived the revolution. She and Claude had married in 1785 and moved to a village in Normandy, far from Paris, far from the violence that would consume the city. When the revolution came, they kept their heads down. Claude found work as a farmhand, then as a tenant farmer. Margot bore children, 5 of them, 3 who lived, and raised them in a cottage not much different from the one her own mother had lived in. She thought about Marianne sometimes, wondered what had happened to the Comtesse, to the house in Paris, to the life she had glimpsed from the servants' stairs. She heard rumours, the aristocrats fleeing, the arrests, the executions, but she never knew for certain what became of her former mistress. The two worlds had separated completely, and there was no bridge between them. Her life was hard, harder in some ways than it had been in service. There was no cook to prepare meals now, no housekeeper to organise the work, just herself and Claude and the endless labour of survival. But it was hers. Her cottage, her children, her quiet afternoons, such as they were, stolen between the milking and the mending, a few minutes to sit on the doorstep and watch the clouds pass. She never learned to read. She never wrote a letter. When she died, at 57, worn out by work and childbirth, she left no record of herself except in the memories of her children, who remembered her hands, rough and red and always busy, and her voice singing them to sleep. Agnes did not fare as well. Her eyes failed completely by 1790. She could no longer make lace, could no longer earn. For a few years, she survived on the charity of neighbours, on the parish poor relief that provided just enough to keep her from starving. She lived in a single room, cold in winter, stifling in summer, dependent on others for everything. She died in the winter of 1794 during a fever that swept through the village. She was 48 years old. No one recorded her death except the parish register. A single line, her name and the date, nothing more. But the lace she had made survived. Some of it, anyway. A collar she had crafted in her best years found its way to a London shop, was purchased by a lady of fashion, was worn to a ball where the lady was admired for her elegance. The lace passed from hand to hand, was treasured, was eventually donated to a museum where it sits now in a glass case, labelled only English lace, late 18th century, maker unknown. Agnes's hands made that. Her skill, her hours of labour, squinting in the light from a cottage window. She is gone, but something of her remains, anonymous, unattributed, beautiful. This is how the 18th century ended. Not with a single dramatic moment, but with countless small endings. Women dying, one by one, taking their quiet afternoons with them. The world they had known dissolving, transforming, becoming something else. The revolution swept through France and sent ripples across Europe. The old order crumbled. The aristocratic patterns of life, the salons, the formal calls, the elaborate rituals of status, gave way to new patterns, new hierarchies, new constraints. But some things persisted. Women still needed rest, still sought beauty, still carved out moments of quiet in the midst of their busy days. The forms changed. The tea services became different. The fashions shifted. The constraints loosened in some ways and tightened in others. But the fundamental need remained. The 19th century was coming, a century of steam and coal and industry, a century that would transform the world more rapidly than any before it. The women of the 18th century could not have imagined what was coming. The factories, the cities, the new technologies that would reshape every aspect of daily life. But they had lived their quiet afternoons. They had read their novels and sewn their seams and written their letters. They had thought their private thoughts and dreamed their private dreams. They had been human, fully human, in all the ways that matter. And now they were passing into history, into memory, into the long silence that swallows everyone. Eventually, take a breath now. We began in a sunlit parlour in Paris, watching Marianne by her window. We have journeyed through decades, through countries, through lives. We have sat with women rich and poor, privileged and labouring, content and restless. We have tried to feel what they felt, to see what they saw, to understand what their quiet afternoons meant. And now we are at the end. The 18th century is over. The women we met are gone, all of them, long gone, dust and memory, and a few traces in archives and museums. The world they knew has vanished so completely that we can barely imagine it. But something connects us to them still. The need for quiet, the need for rest, the need, in the midst of busy lives, for a few hours that are almost our own. You are lying in your bed now, in whatever year this is, in whatever place you call home. The technology around you would seem like magic to Marianne, to Hannah, to Gertrude. The freedoms you enjoy, to work, to travel, to choose your own life, would have been unimaginable to them. And yet here you are, seeking the same thing they sought. A quiet hour, a moment of peace, rest for a weary body and a busy mind. The centuries collapse, the distance dissolves. You are not so different from them after all. Let me leave you with one last image. It is evening now. The quiet afternoon has ended. The light has faded from gold to grey to the deep blue of twilight. Marianne stands at her window, looking out at the garden. The day is over. Tomorrow will bring its own demands, its own obligations, its own performances. But for this moment, this single, suspended moment, she is just a woman looking at the sky. The first stars are appearing, faint points of light in the deepening blue. The same stars that shine above you now, above your bed, above whatever city or town or countryside holds you tonight. She does not know that you exist, cannot imagine the future you inhabit. But if she could, if somehow, across the centuries, she could know that someone would remember her, would try to understand her, would hold her life gently in their imagination, I think she would be glad. We all want to be remembered. We all want to know that our lives mattered, that our quiet afternoons were not wasted, that someone, someday, would think of us with kindness. You have done that tonight. You have remembered, and now it is time to rest. Close your eyes. Feel the weight of your body on the bed, the heaviness of your limbs, the softness of the pillow beneath your head. Let your breathing slow. Each inhale gentle, each exhale releasing something. Tension, thought, the day you have carried. The women we visited are sleeping now too. Sleeping their long sleep, the one that has no waking. But in some sense, they are not gone. They live in the records they left, the objects they made, the children they raised who raised children who raised children who became us. They live in this story. In your imagination, in the quiet space between waking and sleep where all times exist together, where the past is not past, where a woman by a window in 1763 is as real as your own breath. Let the images drift now. The sunlit parlour, the needle and thread, the garden path, the cup of tea. Let them blur and soften, becoming not pictures, but feelings. Warmth, safety, rest. There is nowhere you need to be. There is nothing you need to do. The quiet afternoon is yours. The quiet night is yours. This rest, this peace, this gentle darkness, all yours. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming with me on this journey. Thank you for remembering the women who lived before us, whose quiet hours made our quiet hours possible, whose lives, ordinary, extraordinary, human, deserve to be honored. Sleep now. Let your eyes stay closed. Let your body be heavy. Let your mind drift where it will, carrying these images with you into dreams. The night holds you. The past holds you. You are not alone. You have never been alone. Good night.